Mr. Speaker, I know that members across the House will want to join me in wishing both England and Wales the best of luck for the World Cup. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in places like Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork aren't getting the help they need quickly enough when it comes to mental health. Fellow campaigner James Starkey and I were delighted when the Prime Minister, who was then Chancellor, said he would back our campaign every step of the way to get mental health nurses into GP surgeries. So will the Prime Minister deliver on his promise, back our No Time to Wait pilot scheme developed by the Royal College of Nursing and help get people the support they need?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for his continued campaigning on this important issue. I'm pleased to tell him all 1,250 primary care networks in England are entitled to recruit up to 2 mental health practitioners to work in surgeries. I know the BMA and NHS are looking at expanding that, and I look forward to working with him to ensure that his constituents in Stoke get the mental health support and care that they need.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations to England and Wales on their start to the World Cup, and good luck for the rest of the tournament. Mr. Speaker, the World Cup doesn't belong to FIFA, and it doesn't belong to the host nation. It belongs to everyone who loves football. It's totally unacceptable that during this tournament, gay football fans are unable to acknowledge who they love. And players have been threatened with suspension if they show solidarity with those fans. Shame on FIFA. Britain faces the lowest growth of any OECD nation over the next 2 years. Why?
Mr. Speaker, this country has experienced since 2010 the 3rd highest growth in the G7. This year, the fastest growth in the G7, and unemployment at a multi-decade low. We're getting on to deliver more growth, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering free ports. We're investing in apprenticeships. We're protecting R&D. And if the Labour Party is serious about actually supporting growth, maybe they should get on the phone with their union paymasters and tell them to call off the strike.
Mr. Speaker,
Order. We want to get through Prime Minister's questions, and you're not helping me. Keir Starmer.
He's in total denial. We're bottom of the 38 OECD countries who are all in the same boat when it comes to COVID and Ukraine. And he wants a pat on the back. It's like a football manager, bottom of the league at Christmas, celebrating an away draw 3 months ago, and it won't wash. So they don't like their record, that's the problem. So let's try it another way. Why is Britain set to be the first country into recession and the last country out?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the Right Honourable Gentleman brought up the OECD report, because it contained actually 3 very important points. Firstly, it made the point that actually in the years following the pandemic, we're projected to have almost the highest growth amongst our peer countries. It also made the point, it was crystal clear that the challenges we face are completely international in nature. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, it supported our fiscal plan because it's credible and ensures sustainability. Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman would have known all of that if he actually read the whole report. But he's not interested in substance. He's an opportunist, Mr. Speaker. In 4 weeks, Mr. Speaker, in 4 weeks, I've strengthened the economy. We've put more money into the NHS and schools. We've delivered a deal to tackle illegal migration. In the same 4 weeks, all we've...
Prime Minister. Minister, when I stand, you've got to sit down. But can I just say to you, you came to me quite rightly and said to me, we want to get through Prime Minister's questions. I'm going to give short answers. Please stick to what you have.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that's crashed the economy, and they're sitting there. And I noticed this, Mr. Speaker. I noticed this. He won't say why Britain is set to be the first into a recession and the last out. So I will. 12 years of Tory failure, followed by 12 weeks of Tory chaos. For a decade, they've let our economy drift aimlessly before suddenly cutting the parachute ropes and slamming it to the ground. And because of the changes he's made, a typical household will end up with tax increases of £1,400. They don't want to hear about these tax increases of £1,400. Contrast that to a super wealthy non-dom living here but holding their income overseas. How much more?
Order. Mr. Young, I don't need any more. I don't need shouting, don't need pointing. You're meant to be a good example when you sit on this front bench. Because you're the second, don't spoil what you're meant to do.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think they want to hear this. Because of the changes he's made, a typical household will end up paying tax increases of £1,400. Contrast that to a super wealthy non-dom living here but holding their income overseas. How much more has he asked them to pay?
Just order. As I said to the Prime Minister, I said to the Leader of the Opposition, I've got to get through this list. I need you both to help me and think of other members. Come on.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Labour had 13 years to address this issue and did nothing. Nothing. It was the Conservative government that took action and tightened the rules. But the problem with his idea is that it would end up costing Britain money. Not my words, the words of the former Labour Shadow Chancellor. But rather than peddling fairy tales and gesture politics, let's actually tell him what we're doing to deliver for this country. A record increase in the national living wage, protecting millions from energy bills, protecting the pensioners' triple lock. That's what we're doing for this country.
Mr. Speaker, if they'd grown the economy at the same rate as the last Labour government, we'd have tens of billions of pounds more to spend on that. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't a trick question. The answer is he's not asked non-doms to pay a penny more. Every year, he talks about the money. Every year, that's £3.6 billion thrown away because he won't make them pay their taxes here. How many extra doctors could Britain afford with that money?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that he brought up doctors, because last week we delivered record increases in funding for the NHS. Not just more doctors, but more nurses, more scans, more operations. That shows our commitment to prioritise the NHS. Not my words, the words of the NHS Chief Executive.
Scrapping the non-dom status would allow us to train 15,000 doctors every year. That's what Labour would do. And we can carry on handing out tax breaks to the super rich. Or we can live in a society where people don't have to go private to get a doctor's appointment. It's that simple. He also hands Shell 90p for every £1 they spend drilling. So they haven't paid a penny in windfall tax. Mr. Speaker, you may have seen this week that somebody shredded £10,000 in protest at those propping up an oil and gas giant. But he shreds £10,000 every other minute propping them up. Which does he think is the more absurd?
Mr. Speaker, this is the government that has actually put in place an economic plan that will deliver confidence and stability to our economy. And all I've heard from the Honourable Gentleman today, there's no answers, there's no substance, because there's no plan, Mr. Speaker. He talks about the NHS. We're delivering record funding for the NHS. But we can only do that on the foundations of a strong economy. You can't deliver for the NHS unless you have a plan for the economy, and he doesn't have either, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, every time he opens his mouth, another powerful business voice says he hasn't got a plan on growth. The failure of the last 12 years and the chaos of the last 12 weeks are compounded by the decisions he's taking now. He won't follow Labour's plan to scrap non-dom status. Instead, we've got an NHS staffing crisis. He won't follow Labour's plan to make oil and gas giants pay their fair share. Instead, he hammers working people. And he won't push through planning reform. Instead, he kills off the dream of home ownership. Too weak to take on his party, too weak to take on vested interest, 12 long years of Tory government, 5 Prime Ministers, 7 Chancellors. Why do they always clobber working people?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about leadership. This summer, I stood on my principles and told the country what they needed to hear, even though it was difficult. When he ran for leader, he told his party what they wanted to hear. And even now, he says one thing and he does the other. He says he cares for working people, but he won't stand up to the unions. He said he'd honour Brexit, but he tried to have a second referendum. And now he tries to talk tough about immigration, but he promised to defend free movement. You can trust him to deliver for his party. You can trust me to deliver for the country.
Ruth Edwards.
As we debate how to best help our constituents with their energy costs, 10 million people in Ukraine are without power due to Russia's barbaric strikes on the country's energy infrastructure. So can my right honourable friend set out what support we will be providing to our Ukrainian allies to help them repair the damage and keep their citizens warm this winter?
I'm pleased to tell my honourable friend that I spent time discussing this with President Zelensky at the weekend and talking to Ukrainian families about the impact these awful strikes are having on them. I know the whole House will be proud to know that we're providing millions of pounds of immediate support with generators, shelter and water repairs on top of the 570 mobile power generation that we are donating to power facilities across Ukraine. We're also working with the government to repair critical infrastructure with 8 projects identified by UK Export Finance to be delivered in the near future.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in welcoming the moderator of the Church of Scotland to our proceedings this afternoon and to thank him for his sermon at St Margaret's this morning. Mr. Speaker, this morning the Supreme Court clarified a point of law, but the very point of democracy in this union is now at stake, and democracy will not be denied. Because whether Westminster likes it or not, last year the people of Scotland voted for a Scottish Parliament with a majority and the mandate to deliver an independence referendum. The Prime Minister has every right to oppose independence. He has no right to deny democracy to the people of Scotland. If the Prime Minister keeps blocking that referendum, will he at least be honest and confirm that the very idea that the United Kingdom is a voluntary union of nations is now dead and buried?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying we respect the clear and definitive ruling of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And what I would say to the honourable gentleman, that firstly, I am looking forward to also seeing the moderator of Scotland tomorrow. And I think that the people of Scotland want us to be working on fixing the major challenges that we collectively face, whether that's the economy, supporting the NHS, or indeed supporting Ukraine. Now is the time for politicians to work together, and that's what this government will do.
Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, it is right that we respect the decision of the court. But the Prime Minister can't claim to respect the rule of law and then deny democracy in the very same breath. If democracy is to matter, if elections matter, then mandates matter. Since 2014, the Scottish National Party has won 8 elections in a row. Last year, we won a landslide. The Scottish Parliament now has the biggest majority for an independence referendum in the history of devolution. The Prime Minister doesn't even have a personal mandate to sit in 10 Downing Street. What right does a man with no mandate have to deny Scottish democracy?
But, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to Scottish democracy, I'm pleased that the Scottish Government has one of the most powerful devolved assemblies anywhere in the world. And I'm pleased, and I was pleased very shortly after becoming Prime Minister to be the first Prime Minister in over a decade to attend the Council, to sit down with the First Minister, to explore ways in which we can work together with the Scottish Government to deliver for the people of Scotland. Whether that's delivering our growth deals, delivering free ports, or ensuring that the £1.5 billion of extra Barnet money can go towards supporting public services, that's what we're committed to doing in Scotland.
Gareth Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, last month, Just Stop Oil clambered up the Dartford crossing, causing chaos for days. They then attacked artworks, the M25, and anything else to cause misery and mayhem. These people are not protesters, they are criminals. Will the Prime Minister therefore consider making Just Stop Oil a prescribed organisation so that they can be treated as the criminal organisation they actually are?
Mr. Speaker, the kind of demonstrations we've seen recently disrupt people's daily lives. They cause mass misery for the public and they put people in danger. The police have our full support in their efforts to minimise this disruption and tackle reckless and illegal activity. The Public Order Bill will give them the powers they need, and I look forward to seeing the support that that bill receives from every part of this House.
Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, one of my constituents, Vanessa, has contacted me in floods of tears. Her mortgage payments have risen by £500 a month. She and her husband were already struggling with high energy bills and high food bills. Now, like 1 in 4 across the country, they fear losing their home. We are out of options and heartbroken, says Vanessa. So will the Prime Minister introduce a new mortgage protection fund paid for by reversing his tax cuts to the banks? Will he help Vanessa keep her home?
Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply sorry to hear about Vanessa's circumstances, and I want her to know that the plan that the Chancellor announced last week will help families like hers up and down the country, because it's the right plan to tackle inflation, to limit the increase in mortgage rates and ensure confidence in our economy. There is specific help that the Chancellor announced, offering low-interest loans to those those owners on benefits to cover interest on mortgages of up to $250,000. The Chancellor is also meeting with mortgage lenders in the coming weeks, and we will continue to do all we can to support those homeowners who are struggling with their payments.
Craig Tracy.
Mr. Speaker, I recently took part in the Pitching In campaign, which promotes grassroots sports and also celebrates the volunteers who make it possible every week. So would the Prime Minister join me in thanking those volunteers for the incredible work they do? And also, with top-flight football taking a bit of a break at the moment because of the World Cup, would he join me in reminding people that it's the perfect opportunity to go out and support their local non-league football teams who are incredibly welcoming, and including in that, of course, Atherstone Town Community Football Club, Bedworth United and Coleshill Town in my constituency.
Well, I'm happy to join my honourable friend in praising all his local teams, and he makes an excellent point, actually, that volunteers have a vital role to play in community sport and actually the delivery of major events, and I join him in thanking them for everything that they do. Sport accounts for over half, Mr. Speaker, of volunteering in the UK, and every one volunteer generates a capacity for at least 8 more people to participate in sport, and I know the whole House will join me in praising their efforts.
Alan Dorrance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon. Mr Speaker, since 2014, the SNP have won 8 elections and we now have more councillors, members of the Scottish Parliament and more MPs in this place than any other Scottish political party. Every one of those elected members were elected on a manifesto and clear mandate for Scottish independence. Mr Speaker, what democratic right does this government have to deny Scottish democracy, refuse an independence referendum, and to keep us shackled and imprisoned in this involuntary and unequal union against the will of the Scottish people?
Well, Mr Speaker, again, we respect the decision of the court today with regard to the referendum, and we're getting on with the business of working constructively, collaboratively, in partnership with the Scottish Government to deliver for his constituents. Indeed, the Ayrshire Growth Deal is investing over £100 million to make use of his region's strong industrial heritage, potentially making more use of renewable energy. That's the kind of positive project we should be focused on, and that's what we'll keep on delivering.
John Penrose.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly promised to recruit a successor to Lord Geit as his ethics adviser promptly. But would he accept that threats to integrity are often broader than the job description of the Prime Minister's adviser on the Ministerial Code? And will he therefore commit to introduce the additional measures in the new 5-point integrity plan on topics like lobbying and conflicts of interest, developed with organisations like Transparency International and Spotlight on Corruption, to show he will walk the talk and put party integrity and government integrity at the heart of our democracy?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comprehensive and thoughtful suggestions. As he acknowledged, he knows that I've committed to appointing an independent adviser on ministerial interests, and I very much look forward to studying his other proposals in proper time.
Chris Law.
Mr Speaker, just 3 months ago, this appointed interim Prime Minister said in Scotland, and I quote, "We live in a union, which is of course there by consent and by democracy." And added, "I accept that." Well, Mr Speaker, by their consent and by democracy, the Scottish people have already voted by a clear majority in the Scottish Parliament to have their say through a referendum on the independent future for Scotland. So it begs the ultimate question, Mr Speaker. Can this Prime Minister tell us if he accepts Scottish democracy? And if so, how that's compatible with today's Supreme Court ruling that clearly exposes the myth that the UK is a voluntary union and is upheld by consent?
Mr Speaker, at a time like this, the Scottish people want to see their governments working together on the things that matter to them, and I believe that that is possible. And actually, he should know this, Mr Speaker. In his own constituency, we've been able to support culture and tourism, working together to bring the V&A to Dundee. That's an example of a positive project. It demonstrates the benefits of the union, and that's what we'll keep on delivering.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My right honourable friend will be aware that the government provides a slim financial support across 5 firms for small modular reactors. A few other countries have woken up and are seriously investing in SMRs. As Sizewell will not be running until 2031 at the earliest, should we not be doing the same?
No, my honourable friend actually makes an excellent point, and hopefully he was heartened to hear what the Chancellor said last week, that we want to crack on with our overall nuclear programme. And I think he's right to acknowledge that small and advanced nuclear reactors have the potential to play a key role in that nuclear programme alongside projects like Hinkley and Sizewell. That's why we've allocated £385 million to support them, and like him, I'm keen to see progress as soon as possible.
Dr Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. During the 2014 referendum, we were told that Scotland was an equal partner in a family of nations. Yet the disaster that is Brexit was forced on Scotland against our will, and we see devolution wound back by legislation such as the Internal Market Act. So if the Prime Minister still claims the UK is a voluntary union, can he explain the democratic route by which the people of Scotland get to make a choice over their own future?
Well, Mr Speaker, The UK is a collaborative and constructive union that is delivering for the people of Scotland. Even in Ayrshire itself, where we're working collaboratively with the Scottish Government to invest in aerospace, advanced manufacturing and space. Those are the types of activities that will bring tangible benefit to the people in her region, and that's the right focus for the Government.
Angela Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a North Yorkshire MP, my right honourable friend will know how crucial bus services are to our communities. Last month, Arriva stopped the only bus between Selby and Doncaster, meaning that 40 Selby College students had to find, at very short notice, alternative transport to get to college. Thankfully, the college itself stepped in to resolve the situation. Additionally, across North Yorkshire, around 80 other bus services are now under threat. Can he advise what action he will take to ensure that essential services are not withdrawn at short notice and ensure that these are continued to be operated across Selby District and wider North Yorkshire?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and he knows that I share exactly the same challenges that he faced in our rural areas of making sure that our constituents have access to the bus services they need. I'm pleased that the Chancellor's allocated funding for extra bus services across the country, and I look forward to working with him to ensure that that money finds its way to rural areas like North Yorkshire to provide the connectivity that's so important for people to have opportunity and get access to public services.
Olivia Blair.
May I refer the House to my register of interests? Mr. Speaker, tomorrow marks 1 year since 32 people lost their lives in the Channel. New evidence suggests that the boat reached British waters and that the French and British authorities knew that it was in distress for a very long time. Families are still waiting for answers from the Marine Accident Investigation. Why has this investigation taken so long? Will he commit to a full public inquiry afterwards? And does he concede that this would not have happened if there were safe and legal routes into the UK?
Well, Mr. Speaker, every life that is lost in the Channel is a tragedy, but that is why it is so vital that we break the cycle of criminal gangs that are exploiting people and trafficking them, and that's what the Home Secretary is focused on. We have accepted over 380,000 people over the past few years because this is a place where people can seek refuge and sanctuary, but we must be able to do that in a sustainable way, and that's why it's right that we tackle illegal migration.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, rising energy bills are a challenge for all of us, and constituents in Sleaford and North Hykeham are very grateful for much of the support that has been given by government. But with temperatures this week falling below freezing in Lincolnshire, those living in park homes are particularly concerned at when they will receive their support. So I ask my honourable friend the Prime Minister, can he tell me when and how people living in park homes will receive the £400 which they're entitled to?
And my honourable friend has consistently and rightly championed her rural constituents, making sure that they get access to the energy support that we're providing. It's something that the Chancellor prioritised in last week's autumn statement. I will ensure that we get the money out as quickly as possible. She should also be reassured that the cold weather payment system provides extra financial support to those vulnerable constituents when temperatures drop below a certain point.
Callaghan.
Mr. Speaker, did Scotland vote for Brexit? No. Did Scotland vote for austerity? No. Did Scotland vote for the Tories? No. What we did vote for, don't shout me down. Don't shout me down. I've listened to all of you. What we did vote for only last year was the right to choose our own future. With that in mind, and given a previous non-answer from the Prime Minister, can the Prime Minister tell this House, tell us all in fact, how a nation can leave this so-called voluntary union?
Mr. Speaker, the challenges that we face right now are those that require cooperation between our governments, tackling the economy, supporting the NHS, and I'm pleased that last week's autumn statement means that the Scottish Government will receive £1.5 billion in extra funding to deliver for public services in Scotland, and that's what we will continue doing.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland is a proud nation with a unique heritage. It is a valued member of our family of nations, a union of people bound through the generations by shared interests. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this morning's Supreme Court decision gives the Scottish Nationalists, the SNP, the opportunity for once to put the people of Scotland first. And end its obsession with breaking us apart.
My right honourable friend put it very well, Mr. Speaker.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister won't answer, but it's obvious that the route to Scottish independence is now elections, and we know, Prime Minister, there's going to be many of them. Now, Mr. Speaker, inequality cost, and in France, the middle earners earn 20% more than in the UK, and low earners earn 25% more. This inequality is why the cost of energy and the cost of living hits people worse in the UK, and it's why I'm for independence, incidentally, to choose a better path. But meantime, in my constituency, there are both more off-grid fuel customers and a higher rate of fuel poverty than in Northern Ireland. So will the PM do the right thing and extend the £200 payment that's going to Northern Ireland to the off-grid customers in my geographically distinct constituency, the Hebrides, on the basis of fairness? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, last week's autumn statement announced £55 billion to support families and businesses across the United Kingdom with their energy bills. And the Chancellor paid particular attention to those that are off-grid in rural areas by doubling the support to £200 for them, and that will help many people in his constituency and across the United Kingdom.
Sarah Bretcliffe.
Speaker, I'm sure we'll both be celebrating this weekend what we consider to be one of the best days of the year, and that is Lancashire Day. Thank you personally for hosting the event in Parliament. So will the Prime Minister, though he represents a Yorkshire constituency, join me in welcoming our Lancastrian local leaders and businesses to Parliament today, and join us in supporting our proud history and bright future by levelling up what we consider to be the best county?
May I offer my best wishes to my honourable friend, and indeed to you, Mr. Speaker, for Lancashire Day. And I can put local rivalry aside on this occasion to join her in thanking Lancastrians for their contribution to our country and to wish her the very best for today's event.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, what we've heard from the Prime Minister today is, in essence, that no matter how Scotland votes, Westminster will decide. Yep. But democracy demands differently to that. Mr. Speaker, the late Canon Kenyon Wright said, what if that other voice we know so well says, we say no and we are the state? Well, we say yes and we are the people. And it is the people in Scotland who have to be heard. This place can't stand in the way of democracy. And if this Prime Minister with no mandate thinks it can, is he seriously telling us that this is a voluntary union of equals?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are focused not on the SNP, but on the people of Scotland. That's who we're delivering for. I'm happy to meet with the First Minister, as I continue to do, to deliver for them, whether it's in her own constituency with a growth deal, whether it's moving civil service jobs to Scotland, whether it's delivering free ports or indeed the extra funding for public services. This is a government that will deliver for the people of Scotland, and we will do it constructively and collaboratively.
Order, order. I would now like to make a statement. On the 20th of October, the Culture, Media, Sport Committee published a special report on answers given to it by the Right Honourable Member for Mid-Bedfordshire when she was the Secretary of State for DCMS. The Honourable Member for Ochil, South and Perthshire subsequently wrote to me asking for precedence for a complaint of a breach of privilege, as was his right. I declined to do so since the bar for such a complaint is high. The House should only take action when essential in order to provide reasonable protection for the House, its members or its officers from improper obstruction. I note the committee itself, of which the Honourable Gentleman is a member, has said, had Miss Doris remained the Secretary of State, driving policy of selling the channel, we may have sought referral to the Privilege Committee. But as her claims have not been inhibited, the work of the committee, and she is no longer has a position of power over the future of Channel 4, We are instead publishing this report to enable the House and its members to draw its own conclusion. So I consider it appropriate to respect the committee's assessment of the situation. Correspondence on matters of privilege is private. Indeed, had to grow to great lengths to ensure that members can write to me in confidence on any matter, knowing their communication will remain private. Expect the same courtesy in my replies. The honourable member has seen fit to give a partial and biased account of my letter on Twitter, and I await his apology. I gave the honourable member notice that I would be raising this matter at this time, but I do stress it is not the way we should be doing business in this House. Honourable member for Falkland Pershing.
Mr. Speaker, as you've
the floor. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, as you've just explained, the Commons Culture Committee, in which I sit, published a unanimous cross-party report about the testimony of the Right Honourable Member and the testimony she gave to the committee, and there are now considerable public interest in what should happen next. I want to put on record, Mr. Speaker, that I deplore social media pylons against you or indeed anyone else. I've been on the receiving end of them, and they are exceedingly unpleasant. But could I ask for guidance on what I and other members should tell their constituents about integrity in politics in this context? If someone misleads a committee, what should happen next?
Can I just say, integrity is that, first of all, printing the letter, but only half the letter, is not integrity. In fact, far from it. It misled the people of this country. It certainly put me in bad light with the people of this country, and I don't expect that to happen in an impartial speaker. So if that was an apology, I don't think it was very good. David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, in following on from that, honourable members of this House have certain strict duties on them. First, there is a duty of upholding the institutions of this House. Clearly, in breaching the confidentiality of the Speaker's private correspondence, the member for Oakle and South Perthshire has knowingly broken that rule. And frankly, for that, if that was an apology, that was not sufficient for that alone. But we also have a duty to tell the truth. Now, in his public pronouncements, he implicitly criticised you, Mr. Speaker, for not referring the DCMS Secretary of State to the Privileges Committee. But you were simply following the convention of agreeing with the DCMS Select Committee, of which he is a member. And when they decided not to refer, there was no minority report from him. There was not even a vote against from him. It was a unanimous vote. So what he was trying to do, Mr. Speaker, was to blame you by his partial release of his letter, and he was leading the public to believe that somehow you made this decision against the wishes of the committee. The rules of this House do not allow me to assert whether I view the misleading of the public as deliberate. So the House can make its own judgment on that. But this miserable half apology was completely inadequate for the breach of this measure.
I'm going to leave it there for today, and I hope the Honourable will reconsider the way he's put his own part. Now I come to the urgent question. I'm going to let members leave before.
Well, that's PMQ's over with a bit of a parliamentary spat at the end. We're lucky enough to have Peter Bone still with us, not just MP and Conservative member for Wellingborough, but a former deputy leader of the House. Peter, just to explain what was happening there, this was the Speaker's impartiality, his position being called into question effectively by an MP. And John Nicholson, in the Speaker's own view there, not really apologising for it.
Well, he didn't apologise. He doubled down on it. And that was extra. I don't actually think, in all my time in Parliament, I've seen that happen. I mean, the Speaker was obviously furious. He brought this up at the end of PMQs, which isn't where it would normally happen.
Right.
And Kylie, that was clearly not an apology.
OK, 6 SNP questions. We've got now an urgent question from Ian Blackford. Let's just head back to the Commons for this.
Important ruling of the Supreme Court on the issue of the competence of the Scottish
Parliament
to legislate for a referendum on independence. The UK Supreme Court has today determined that it is outside the powers of the Scottish Parliament to hold an independence referendum. And I respect the Court's clear and definitive ruling on this matter. The Scottish Government's Lord Advocate referred this question to the Supreme Court, which has today given its judgment. And, Mr. Speaker, the UK Government's position has always been clear that it would be outside the Scottish Parliament's competence to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence because it is a matter wholly reserved to the United Kingdom Parliament. We welcome the Court's unanimous and unequivocal ruling, which supports the United Kingdom's government's long-standing position on this matter. People want to see the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government focus on issues that matter to them, not on constitutional division. People across Scotland rightly want and expect to see both their governments and the United Kingdom and the Scottish Government working together with the relentless focus on the issues that matter to them, their families and their communities. The Prime Minister has been very clear and has demonstrated since day one that it is our duty to work constructively with the Scottish Government. We fully respect the devolution settlement and we want to work together with the Scottish Government on vital areas like tackling the cost of living, growing our economy and leading the international response to Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. At this time of unprecedented challenges, the benefits of being part of the United Kingdom have never been more apparent. Never been more apparent. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom Government is providing the Scottish Government with a record block grant settlement of £41 billion per year over the next 3 years. And the people in Scotland are benefiting from unprecedented cost of living support announced by this Prime Minister and our Chancellor. It is important now that we move on from constitutional issues to focus on tackling our shared challenges. I therefore welcome the Supreme Court judgment and I call on the Scottish Government to set aside these divisive constitutional issues so that we can work together, focusing all of our attention on and resources on the key issues that matter to the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom Government is proud of its role as the custodian of the devolution settlement. The United Kingdom is one of the most successful political and economic unions in the world. By promoting and protecting its combined strengths, we are building on hundreds of years of partnership and shared history. And Mr. Speaker, I'd conclude by saying that when we work together as one United Kingdom, we are safer, stronger and more prosperous.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. It is right that the UK Government answers questions today and answers them quickly, because this morning the Supreme Court dealt with a question of law. There is now a massive question of democracy.
Hear, hear.
Some of the Westminster parties are already widely celebrating this morning's decision, but I think it's safe to say that their thoughtless triumphalism won't last very long. Because this judgment raises profound and deeply uncomfortable questions about the basis of the future of the United Kingdom. The biggest question of all is how the Prime Minister can ever again repeat the myth that the United Kingdom is a voluntary union of nations. In 2014, the Smith Commission made it clear that, and I quote, "Nothing in its report prevented Scotland becoming an independent country should the people of Scotland so choose." If that is true, if his government is still committed to that promise, will he urgently amend the Scotland Act to ensure that the Scottish people have the right to choose our own future? If he fails to do that, is he deliberately choosing to deny democracy? Because a so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even itself to ask the question, cannot be described in any way as a voluntary or even a partnership at all. Mr. Speaker, what today's decision does is cast focus on the democratic decisions of the Scottish people. Since 2014, the SNP has won 8 elections in a row. We have secured multiple mandates. The question is, how many times How many times do people in Scotland have to vote for a referendum before they get it? The more contempt the Westminster establishment shows for Scottish democracy, the more certain it is that Scotland will vote yes when the choice does come to be made.
Absolutely.
Because Scotland didn't vote for Brexit. We didn't vote for a new age of Tory austerity. We didn't vote for this Prime Minister. And we haven't voted for the Tories in Scotland since 1955. What we did vote for was the choice of a different future. If Westminster keeps blocking our democratic decisions, lawfully and democratically, Scotland will find a way out of this union.
Mr. Speaker, I would raise a couple of points to the Honourable. This idea that there was a mandate delivered in 2021 in the holiday elections is completely misleading. As the First Minister herself said in an interview in the Herald, that parties, and this is when she thought that the former First Minister, their leader, previous leader Alex Salmond, was gaming the system with his party Alba. She very clearly said that parties should stand on both the list and first past the post constituency system, and the Greens did not fulfil that. Neither did Alba. So let's be clear: in the 22 Holyrood elections, the so-called mandate, less than 1/3 of the Scottish electorate voted for the SNP.
Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, Ian Murray.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Can I begin by the urgent question from Ian Blackford to the question as regards the mandate, effectively, that the SNP had got, as we're hearing there, dating back to that 2020 mandate. But I think a total of 6 SNP questions then in PMQs. Peter Bone is still with us, former Deputy Leader of the House. I think that's probably a record for SNP questions, and one reflects that when they're criticising Scottish democracy, it appears to be in action here at Westminster, doesn't it?
It was extraordinary to have 6 on the order paper, because the order paper in theory is drawn out by ballot, and there's no way you would have thought that had come up. But obviously perhaps people knew that the court ruling was today, and that's why it was.
And the point being made by Ian Blackford, we've had the legal ruling, but we haven't really had the political discussion, so the right place for it to take place.
Well, as is happening now, the debate is going on, and that's right. And there's no reason why the Scottish nationalists shouldn't continue to campaign for independence, but everybody knew that there was a referendum, and the people decided not to go independent, and that referendum was for generations. So
55-45.
So that was everybody knew it. So you can't have a referendum every other month until you get the result you want.
Yeah, they wanted it October next year. But in a way, does this fact that this Supreme Court ruling has been handed down give them more ammunition? As we've heard, their line of attack now is that this should be about Scottish democracy, that it should be able to, that Scotland should be able to decide the route that it's take, rather than Westminster sitting on it, as they claim.
Well, the Scottish people spoke. They did not want independence. They wanted to continue to be part of the United Kingdom, which is a great union. So they have no mandate for that. And a general election, people vote on all sorts of reasons. This
is Nicola Sturgeon's idea that the general election in Scotland should be a referendum.
I mean, that is a nonsense. You vote. Why I vote Conservative, why I vote Labour is a whole range of things. It's not about one issue, so that is totally misleading. And as I think the Secretary of State for Scotland was just saying, last election only 1/3 of the people voting in Scotland voted for the SNP, so there's no mandate there.
You spotted Theresa May coming into the chamber, and she was asking a question not making a question, but making a statement, effectively, on the question of the union.
It's very unusual for the former Prime Minister to come in. She wasn't on the order paper. She was bobbing, so she was trying to catch the Speaker's eye. And she must have felt very passionate about it. And I thought her, well, it was a statement, wasn't it, was so clear. And I think most of the people, except the SNP, would have agreed with what she said.
Right, OK, an obsession of breaking up the union, as she described it. Peter, for the moment, thank you for that. Let's head to Downing Street. Our political reporter, Catherine Foster, is there for us. And, Catherine, of course, this was Rishi Sunak back for PMQs. He was at the G20 meeting, or the indication in Bali on the COP27. Indications that we've got the battle lines now for a general election, with Keir Starmer going time and time again on clobbering the working class.
Yes, it's become a bit more difficult for Labour in terms of attacking the Conservatives since Liz Truss went, because clearly then it was very easy to distinguish. The Conservative Party had moved quite far to the right. They were proposing tax cuts for the people at the very top. The autumn statement that was announced by the Chancellor last week moved the Conservatives much more to the centre, so it has become harder for Keir Starmer. But a couple of lines that he took, he went very much on the tax rises announced last week. He said that the average household would pay £1,400 more in tax on average. Obviously a large sum of money, especially in the middle of a cost of living crisis. He said 12 years of Tory failure, 12 weeks of Tory chaos. And he went again on non-DOMs because, of course, this is an issue on which the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is a bit vulnerable, isn't he, given that his very wealthy wife, richer than the King of the UK, was registered as a non-dom, and that became clear earlier this year, and then she decided to drop that and she would in fact pay tax. Now the Conservatives are saying that the reason they're keeping on with that status is because it would cost the government more to get rid of it. In terms of what Rishi Sunak said, also he attacked Keir Starmer over the unions. That's an area where potentially Labour are vulnerable, and also Keir Starmer's previous support for the second referendum. So I thought Rishi Sunak was on a stronger footing this time than a couple of weeks ago, where he was a bit flat, not very clear, because obviously he was Chancellor, so he's got all the answers on the economy. And I think the Prime Minister's team will be fairly happy with his performance today.
Yeah, and the backbenchers a little bit more vocal this time. Catherine, thank you for that. But we've heard now from Catherine and from Peter. Let's get the views now of former Labour MP Stephen Pound in the name of political balance. And Stephen, we heard that phrase, clobbering the working man, working people. Is this sort of good old-fashioned class warfare back ahead of the election?
Well, there's a certain smell of that sort of gun smoke in the air, but I mean, I've never been accused of political balance, for heaven's sake. But, I think
carry on anyway.
On the other hand, Peter Bone and I are probably opposite ends of the spectrum on most things. But so, look, it was a very interesting one, because certainly the battle lines were being laid out there, no question. Rishi Sunak was much more combative, he's much more aggressive, and he's probably lighted on the one thing that is a real weakness for Labour. Labour could lose the next election if they work really hard at it. And one of the things that they could do to lose the election is to be over-identified with a very unpopular approaching a general strike. I mean, as frequently pointed out, general strikes in 1926 led into 20 years of the Tories, and 1979 it was about 19 years of the Tories. So that's a weakness. But I think what we actually saw here today was Keir much more animated, Ritchie much more animated, and I think it's going to be. I don't know how they can keep this up for the next 2 years. But for me, one of the high points of the day was two things that really struck me. One was, unlike the Right Honourable Member for Wellingborough, who never ever spoke from notes, every single speaker there, except the two front benches, was reading from notes. I have to say, in my day, it wouldn't have. And the other thing was, when Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, for whom I have massive admiration, responded to that gratuitous attack where somebody took a few sentences out of a letter and published them on Twitter. Had the volcanic Mr. Burko been in the chair, the roof of the building would have been flying into the Thames by now.
This was John Nicholson, but I think Sir Lindsay Hoyle gave a pretty good idea of what his feelings were on that, didn't he? It was a little bit of drama there.
Well, I mean, Burko would have done all but leap from the chair, descend the considerable distance from the seat of the chair to the floor, and grabbed him by the neck. But I mean, I have to say, sometimes you need to actually use the dagger rather than the cutlass. And I think Lindsay used the poniard, the stiletto there.
Right. OK. Let's just have a thought, too, from Peter on this idea. I just put it to you earlier, ahead of PMQs, there was observation that the Times saying there could be 80 MPs about to jump ship. You would say, well, that happens every Parliament, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the Times trying to sell papers. I mean, Stephen Pound, I think his analysis, much of it was spot on. And the reading from notes, I mean, it's just... the thing that disappoints me about PMQs at the moment We don't get questions on the most important issue, which is the war in Europe. We're sending helicopters to support.
Nothing to ask what would Ben Wallace, the details of that deal and so on.
And I mean, one Conservative member brought it up. But that should, I mean, why the opposition are not dealing with that issue? Because let's face it, we are behind America, we're the biggest supporter of Ukraine. I find it weird that we're not talking at the Prime Minister's question. Why the Leader of Opposition never asks about that?
Stephen, the danger of yet more agreement, do you share those sentiments?
Excuse me a second. Yeah, I do. It was quite. I almost felt sorry for Rishi Sunak at one stage because he was being asked questions all about sort of mental health in Stoke-on-Trent and all this. And somebody said, "What are you doing about restoring power supplies into Kyiv and to Kherson?" Now, I accept him to say, "Well, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and belt down there with a toolkit and do my level best." That was the one question. But really and truly. I think what you do in PMQs, what you do in Qs, is you concentrate your fire in one particular part of the battlements. And today, the fire was very, very clearly on the issue of non-DOMs, the issue of how many doctors could we train, how many, etc., etc., etc. That was the battle plan for today. That's what you do. If you have more than one topic on Qs, then you spread your fire too wide, you dilute it. So that was good, classical, tactical, Tony Blair type PMQs, and I think it actually, I'm not saying it hold Rishi below the waterline, but it certainly blew away some of the superstructure.
Yeah. OK, and you're guilty of product placement as well as agreement. So there. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Any product.
Cheers. Yeah, I wish I had some in my cup, but there we are. Thank you very much. Thank you to Peter as well. You're watching GB News Live. All the latest reaction coming up to what we've heard. But let's get an update on the weather for you now.
It's been a wet morning for much of the UK, but things turning brighter this afternoon. Some sunny spells coming through, but a whole host of blustery showers as well, particularly in the west, where they will be accompanied by gusty winds. This low pressure, and in particular this weather front, made for a very soggy start. A zone of rain working its way eastwards, the isobars squeezing together behind it, blowing in plenty of showers. But that rain is now starting to pull away from the east, heading out into the North Sea, lingering perhaps across the northern parts of Scotland. Brighter skies following, but also lots of showers already into Wales and northwest England. More showers feeding into southwest England. A few getting to the Midlands, but I suspect much of eastern England will be dry this afternoon. It should brighten up across Aberdeenshire by the very end of the day. Single figures generally across the north. Double digits the high further south, but blustery, so feeling cool with that gusty wind continuing to pile plenty of showers into Wales, southwest England this evening. Some quite heavy ones around as well, but they fade. We'll keep some showers going in western Scotland, but many places will become dry overnight, clear, but enough of a breeze to stop temperatures getting too close to freezing, mostly about 4 to 6 to start Thursday. We'll start with quite a bit of sunshine across these central and eastern parts, but here comes another band of rain. Now, this will zip through, but it will be pretty heavy as it crosses Northern Ireland in the morning, then gets into Wales and southwest England, western parts of Scotland, before heading into the Midlands around the middle part of the day. An hour or two of pretty intense rain zipping through and a gusty wind. Much of the east will be dry again. Temperatures perhaps a little higher tomorrow, double digits, 11 to 12 Celsius. A wet evening across parts of the east as that rain finally shimmies through, and guess what? It's followed by clear spells and more showers, again coming in on a fairly gusty wind as we head into Friday. But actually, not too many showers around on Friday, looking largely dry. There will be another spell of rain crossing the country this weekend and slowly turning a bit milder.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
It's 1 o'clock, you're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst and here's what we've got for you this hour. An exclusive report. We hear from rough sleepers in Blackpool who claim they've become invisible after hundreds of asylum seekers were moved into hotels across the seaside town. The Supreme Court has ruled that any decision to grant Scotland a second independence referendum can only be made by the UK government. We'll hear from Nicola Sturgeon and what the SNP will be doing now. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accuses the government of crashing the UK economy again. Angry exchanges in the Commons during Prime Minister's questions, analysis and reaction coming up. Plus, fears over the fitness of England's World Cup captain Harry Kane. He's had a scan on his ankle. What does it show? We'll have the latest for you from Doha. And email us at ever, views@gbnews.uk, and we'll reflect those throughout the programme. But first, latest news headlines with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Scotland's First Minister says the next general election will act as a de facto referendum.
The Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
The UK government won its legal battle against a second Scottish independence referendum in the Supreme Court. Nicola Sturgeon accused Westminster of blocking the vote as a route to independence. She also says a special SNP conference will be held in the new year to determine how to move forward.
A so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even to ask itself the question, cannot be described in any way as voluntary or even a partnership at all. So this ruling confirms that the notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership of nations, if it ever was a reality, is no longer a reality. And that exposes a situation that is quite simply unsustainable.
The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has welcomed the Supreme Court ruling and called for politicians to work together.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying we respect the clear and definitive ruling on the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And what I would say to the honourable gentleman, firstly, I am looking forward to also seeing the moderator of Scotland tomorrow. And I think that the people of Scotland want us to be working on fixing the major challenges that we collectively face, whether that's the economy, supporting the NHS, or indeed supporting Ukraine. Now is the time for politicians to work together, and that's what this government will do.
Homeless people have accused the government of prioritising illegal migrants over their welfare. More than 300, mostly male asylum seekers have been staying at the Metropole Hotel on Blackpool's seafront for the past year. A homeless group in the city, which includes an armed forces veteran, have been speaking to GB News. They say they're living rough on the streets, while Channel migrants are put up in a nearby hotel.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here.
And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
The Home Secretary is blaming the growing migrant crisis on extenuating circumstances. Appearing before the Home Affairs Committee, Suella Braverman said accepting Ukrainians who were forced to flee the war has had an impact on processing asylum seekers. She also says that thousands of migrants crossing the Channel in small boats are at fault by crossing illegally.
We've never seen 40,000 people arrive in the UK through dangerous and illegal means. We've never had 140,000 people welcomed in good faith, and rightly so, from Ukraine, who are, to some degree, taking up some of our accommodation. We've never seen, in addition to that, another 80,000 people who we are accommodating who are waiting for their asylum claims. That all takes up beds and accommodation.
Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says the government's simply failing to get a grip on the problem.
The hotel's not been taken over by migrants. What's happened is the Home Office has ended up booking hotels in places like Blackpool and around the country to put people up for extended periods of time because of their own failure to process applications, and it's costing a fortune. So it is the Home Office and their system failures.
In other news now, and Royal Mail says it's made a best and final offer in an attempt to end its dispute with the Communication Workers Union. The deal includes a pay rise of up to 9% over 18 months and a new profit share scheme for employees. Union members have held a series of strikes in recent weeks, which Royal Mail says has cost the company £100 million. A fresh 48-hour strike is due to be held on Thursday and Friday this week. Millions of pensioners are going to get a cash boost from today as part of the government's expanded winter fuel payment system. 11.6 million people will receive up to £600 to help with their energy bills. The government says most payments will be automatic, with households getting the money in their bank accounts over the next 2 months. The UK is increasing its support for Ukraine, supplying helicopters for the first time. The government's sending 3 former British military Sea Kings to Kyiv. A further 10,000 artillery rounds are also being sent to help Ukraine secure newly recaptured territory. The announcement follows the Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine at the weekend, where he pledged a further £50 million for air defence. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed. And more now on our exclusive report with homeless people in Blackpool, one of the UK's most deprived towns, telling GB News they've become invisible in their view as authorities now prioritise housing Channel migrants there. The group, including young people and an armed forces veteran, say they're being forced to sleep on the streets now, while more than 300 asylum seekers have been placed in one of the town's historic hotels. Our Home and Security editor Mark White has our exclusive report.
It's illumination season in Blackpool, but amidst the bright lights, there's a darker side to this tourist town. Down at street level, in the shadows, are Blackpool's forgotten. The homeless and the vulnerable are growing increasingly resentful, as one of the town's historic hotels plays host to more than 300 Channel migrants, just yards from where they're forced to sleep rough on the streets.
I'm invisible. I am literally invisible. People walk past. They don't even see you now.
Sketch has been sleeping rough in Blackpool for months. His story sums up the absurdity of the Channel migrant crisis and will serve only to stoke the anger felt by many. Inside this hotel, mainly young men who paid criminal gangs to cross the Channel illegally. While life for Sketch and friend Gaz, an army veteran, seems almost unbearably miserable. With post-traumatic stress, his downward spiral eventually left Gaz on the streets. He didn't want to talk on camera, but Sketch sums up the anger they all feel and what they see as the injustice of their treatment in stark contrast to the migrants nearby.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here, and with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
With 50,000 hotel and bed and breakfast rooms across Blackpool, it's an obvious target for Home Office contractors looking for more asylum seeker accommodation. Indeed, the travel group linked to this hotel and 4 others in Blackpool confirmed to us they've been approached and offered a large sum of money by a company looking to acquire 3 hotels in the area for migrant use. They've said no at the moment, but the operations director admits the offer is tempting.
The industry itself is extremely difficult at the minute, so when something like that comes along where you're guaranteed a year and and you're full all the time and the rates that they're looking to pay for that, then yeah, I can see quite easily why it could be considered by somebody.
The area's Conservative MP says he'll be on the front line of any protests against new migrant hotels.
My inbox is already full of people who can't get a council house, can't get an NHS dentist, a GP appointment, and the idea that you can locate 300 asylum seekers in the UK's most deprived ward, which is where they are currently being hosted, without that wraparound support is complete and utter madness.
Blackpool's Forgotten are desperate for help, but as authorities here are forced to house growing numbers of asylum seekers, Sketch and his companions are, it seems, weighed down the list of priorities.
It's hard. Last night, an elderly friend of ours fell ill and we found the ambulance. He was close to death.
And as this resort heads into the winter months, life for those living rough on its streets will only get harder. Mark White, GB News, Blackpool.
Well, Mark, with us in the studio now. It's pretty depressing stuff, Mark, isn't it? You know, for people trying to get by. And also, one reflects, I mean, I put to you, I think the figure was £7 million a day being spent on hotel accommodation. And you were then telling me that doesn't include all the council housing and local authority stock that is also being paid for, and private landlords as well. That's an extra cost.
Yeah, in the round, there's a massive cost to the UK taxpayer of dealing with the number of asylum seekers in this country. The government tells us about this 7 million figure for the hotel accommodation, but yes, as I was saying, that doesn't tell us how much they're paying private landlords to put people up in rented accommodation. It doesn't tell us the cost that local authorities are facing in having to turn over their council housing stock, social housing stock from local housing associations as well, and then take in all of the wraparound services, Mark, such as education, healthcare, public protection, social services and the like. It's massive, the bill for this.
And these will be people waiting for the processing for their asylum claims to be assessed. So this can be quite a lengthy process.
That, again, is a very significant issue here. Not only are there very large numbers of asylum seekers when you take in the 140,000 who've come from Ukraine, the 80,000 from Afghanistan, add that to the 40,000 from this year, 28,000 from the year before, it all adds up to a very significant community, and only a small proportion of those have actually been dealt with, Mark. And one thing that's actually slowing the system down as well is the way in which many of the Albanians who've come across are claiming to be victims of modern slavery. And that then is, we're told by the Home Secretary, who was giving evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee this morning, is slowing down that national referral mechanism and making it 10 times longer for someone who claims to be a victim of modern slavery to get an initial assessment and agreement on that. This is what Suella Braverman said.
The reality is that our legal framework is allowing those claims to be made and then processed, and you can really see that when it comes to modern slavery. A few years ago, it would take on average approximately 40 days before a decision would be made on modern slavery grounds. And now, because the system has been overwhelmed, largely by people coming here illegally on small boats, it's now taking over 400 days. So, and the law in our Modern Slavery Act obliges the state to carry out an assessment of someone's modern slavery claim.
Now, this was the Home Affairs Committee, MPs grilling the Home Secretary, and she actually admitted the government has failed to control UK borders. And, of course, there have been successive governments. In particular, Rwanda was forwarded as one answer. Senior civil servant, Permanent Secretary Matthew Rycroft, saying 140 million paid to Rwanda so far, but he's unsure whether the stalled asylum policy is value for money. That's the top civil servant assessing that.
Yeah, and they will only know whether it's value for money until, once they are actually able to start putting people down to Rwanda in significant numbers. They're not going to be able to do that, Mark, until it gets out of the courts. It's still mired in a legal challenge. We're expecting judges to come back any time now, hopefully, from the government's point of view, and rule whether the Rwanda policy is legal or not. Now, even if the court rules that it's legal, that's going to be challenged in a higher court. And it's going to be some time before the whole Rwanda issue is finally put to bed. And by that time, we could be years down the line, and God knows how many other people will have come illegally into the country by then.
And all the while, those people you spoke to in Blackpool, as far as we're aware, will still be out on the streets.
Yes, I mean, the thing to say about that, I mean, Blackpool has an acute homelessness crisis.
As many seaside towns do, yeah. 800
people are assessed as being homeless in Blackpool. Now, that doesn't mean that they are rough sleepers. It's a fraction of that number who would be sleeping rough on the streets. But they have lots of complex issues. They need that wraparound service from local authorities. But when local authorities are struggling on a daily basis to provide all of those services for hundreds of asylum seekers coming into the local authority area, you can see how people fall through the cracks.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for updating us with your exclusive report. Then, of course, we'll see what reaction comes to it. Now, to the politics of the day with, well, not politics, the courts too, because it's the UK Supreme Court, rather, that's ruled that the Scottish Government cannot hold its independence referendum without the UK Government's consent. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon intending to hold that referendum October next year, but the court says she does not have the power to do so.
Modification of the definition of reserved matters by an order in council under section 30 of the Scotland Act or otherwise, the Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
It must be clear today that the Supreme Court does not make the law, it interprets and applies the law. If the devolution settlement in the Scotland Act is inconsistent with any reasonable notion of Scottish democracy, as now seems to be the case, that is the fault of Westminster lawmakers, not the justices of the Supreme Court. In addressing the implications of today's ruling, it's also important to be mindful of what the court was not asked to decide, and therefore what the ruling does not tell us. The court was not asked to decide if there is a democratic mandate for a referendum. The mandate and the parliamentary majority for a referendum is quite simply undeniable. Nor was the court asked if Scotland should be independent. Only the Scottish people can be the judge of that.
That was Nicola Sturgeon. Let's get some reaction now of our political reporter Olivia Utley in Edinburgh, outside the Scottish Parliament building. And Olivia, as we're getting not just from the First Minister, but 6 SNP questions to Westminster, the legal decision, but the politics goes on.
Absolutely, and although on the face of it this looks like quite a decisive win for the UK government, it might turn out to be a bit of a Pyrrhic victory. There were 2 other possible options to the Supreme Court judgment today. One was an SNP win, which is quite straightforward. The other was that the court just kicked out the case, saying it was not within their jurisdiction. That was actually the ideal scenario for the UK government, because with this result, although yes, the UK government has won, Nicola Sturgeon can make the argument that Westminster is now placing a deliberate impediment in the way of Scottish democracy. And that's already what she's arguing. She is now conflating the issue of independence with democracy. So she's saying that without independence, Scottish democracy is no more, essentially. Now, the way she's going to proceed with getting independence now is to turn the general election into what she calls de facto referendum on independence, which basically means that the stakes are very, very high for this general election. Either Nicola Sturgeon makes this de facto referendum and she loses, in which case it does feel very much like the end of Nicola Sturgeon's long career and quite possibly the end of talk about independence in Scotland for a while, or she wins that general election, she considers that a mandate for independence in Scotland, and then it's quite hard to see how the UK government could continue to block a referendum. Now, I've spoken to a Scottish MP, a Scottish Conservative MP here this morning, who says, no, it's business as usual and the Scottish people won't accept the general election as a de facto referendum on independence. They're worried about drug deaths in Scotland, about schools in Scotland, about general health in Scotland, and Sturgeon will lose. Well, that's what the unionists are hoping, but either way, the stakes are certainly very, very high, much higher than they were yesterday.
And indeed, yeah, a reporter at that news conference asking her what mandate result would actually indicate to you that you've got the OK to go for independence. As you've indicated, given all the other issues, the state of the NHS up there in Scotland, will there be a two-tier system? And, of course, the ferry contracts, all those other issues actually dogging the SNP.
Absolutely, and turning a general election into a referendum on the future of Scotland's place in the United Kingdom would be an unprecedented thing to do, really, and would, yes, leave a lot of questions in the minds of the public about what the SNP wants to do about all the pressing domestic issues affecting Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon did allude to that this morning in her statement. She said that she was going to put together a committee to talk about those issues and to decide exactly how it would work. So she's essentially kicked the can a bit further down the road on these issues. But her plan, it's clear, is to try and turn the general election into an independence referendum, which she now sees as the only legal, internationally recognised way to hold that independence referendum she so desperately wants.
Olivia in Edinburgh, thank you very much indeed, and we'll obviously update people with the reactions that comes in through this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. But from Edinburgh, we'll be going live to Qatar because Harry Kane has had that scan on his ankle. What does it show? Will he be fit for Friday? We'll be updating you. Let's take a look at the weather now.
It's been a wet morning for much of the UK, but things turning brighter this afternoon. Some sunny spells coming through, but a whole host of blustery showers as well, particularly in the west, where they will be accompanied by gusty winds. This low pressure, and in particular this weather front, made for a very soggy start. A zone of rain working its way eastwards, the isoboreals squeezing together behind it, blowing in plenty of showers. But that rain is now starting to pull away from the east, heading out into the North Sea, lingering perhaps across the northern parts of Scotland. Brighter skies following, but also lots of showers already into Wales and northwest England. More showers feeding into southwest England. A few getting to the Midlands, but I suspect much of eastern England will be dry this afternoon. It should brighten up across Aberdeenshire by the very end of the day. Single figures generally across the north. Double digits the high further south, but blustery, so feeling cool with that gusty wind continuing to pile plenty of showers into Wales, southwest England this evening. Some quite heavy ones around as well, but they fade. We'll keep some showers going in western Scotland, but many places will become dry overnight, clear, but enough of a breeze to stop temperatures getting too close to freezing, mostly about 4 to 6 to start Thursday. We'll start with quite a bit of sunshine across these central and eastern parts, but here comes another band of rain. Now, this will zip through, but it will be pretty heavy as it crosses Northern Ireland in the morning, then gets into Wales and southwest England, western parts of Scotland, before heading into the Midlands around the middle part of the day. An hour or two of pretty intense rain zipping through and a gusty wind. Much of the east will be dry again. Temperatures perhaps a little higher tomorrow, double digits, 11 to 12 Celsius. A wet evening across parts of the east as that rain finally shimmies through. And guess what? It's followed by clear spells and more showers, again coming in on a fairly gusty wind as we head into Friday. But actually, not too many showers around on Friday, looking largely dry. There will be another spell of rain crossing the country this weekend and slowly turning a bit milder.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Plenty happening once more in the World Cup, on and off the pitch. England fans with some nervousness ahead of Friday's match against the United States because of that injury scare to captain Harry Kane. Let's get the latest from Doha. Our reporter Paul Hawkins is there because, Paul, we remember he came off with that after that heavy tackle, and I gather he's had a scan on the ankle. Is it good or bad?
Good. He's even trained a little bit today. This is according to Jordan Pickford, the England keeper, who was giving that press conference, and he said he thinks Harry Kane's a little bit sore, but other than that, the scan appears to show no serious damage. He did train today, and so it looks like Harry Kane will be okay for Friday.
Now, that's on the pitch. I think there yet more rows, if that's the right word, off the pitch with Germany, with, of course, that game against Japan. I think for the group photo, they've just put their hand over their mouth, which indicates their displeasure, shall we say, on this whole issue of LGBT rights out there.
Yeah, in fact, I'm just reading about it now. I've only just seen the picture myself. So
yeah, it's just dropped now,
Japan. Yeah, and it's a goalless at the moment, but frankly, the football taking a backseat again to the politics. They tweeted this picture where they're holding their mouths in the team photo, and in big letters underneath it says armband or no armband, we stand by our position. And then it's quite a lengthy tweet, to be honest. Bear with me. It wasn't about making a political statement, say the German FA. Human rights are non-negotiable. That should be taken for granted, but it still isn't the case. That's why this message is so important important to us. Denying us the armband is the same as denying us a voice. So, you know, Germany coming out really strongly on that stance. We know the Danish FA, the German FA are currently investigating legal avenues as to whether FIFA were right to sanction players with a yellow card for wearing that One Love armband, and the Danish FA are thinking of following suit as well. So it felt like this issue was kind of now behind us, but clearly not, and so there's more to come.
And you mentioned Denmark. I mean, the other news that's breaking is that I gather Denmark are talking to other members of UEFA, which includes England, of course, because one of 7 planning to have worn those One Love armbands, and Denmark talking about potentially quitting FIFA over this issue.
Yeah, I mean, clearly FIFA were trying to close down this issue by sanctioning yellow cards. The FAs of those European countries then had to backtrack, but clearly, if they're thinking of leaving football's governing body, leaving UEFA, or taking legal action, clearly this is an issue that those countries' FAs, it's a fight that they're up for, and it'll be interesting to see whether England follow suit. Especially what's happened today, you can expect more questions about that before Friday's game against the USA.
Now, plenty of people out and about behind you enjoying themselves, but I gather that the Qatari authorities have also been asking people not to sing, or at least to quieten down a bit.
Yeah, as you just heard, the Morocco fans haven't got the memo on that one. I don't think any of the fans have, quite frankly, and certainly not the Saudis after yesterday. So look, they can ask politely, but frankly, you're not going to be able to contain people's enthusiasm out here. Ironically, I still have yet to hear a rendition of Sweet Caroline, but all the other countries are in full voice.
OK, well, we'll let you go away and rehearse that and maybe have a performance a bit later. Dropped yourself in it there. Paul, thank you very much indeed. More from you, of course, throughout the day. But let's get an update coming up now on all the news headlines. Rosie's waiting for us.
It's 1:30. Good afternoon. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Scotland's First Minister says the next general election will act as a de facto referendum.
The Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
It's after the UK government won its legal battle against a second Scottish independence referendum in the Supreme Court. Nicola Sturgeon accused Westminster of blocking the vote as a route to independence. She also says a special SNP conference will be held in the new year to determine how to move forward.
A so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even to ask itself the question, cannot be described in any way as voluntary or even a partnership at all. So this ruling confirms that the notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership of nations, if it ever was a reality, is no longer a reality. And that exposes a situation that is quite simply unsustainable.
Some homeless people have accused the government of prioritising illegal migrants over their welfare. More than 300, mostly male asylum seekers, have been staying at the Metropole Hotel on Blackpool's seafront for the past year. A homeless group in the city, which includes an armed forces veteran, have been speaking to GB News. They say they're living rough on the streets while Channel migrants are given accommodation.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here. And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
The UK is escalating its support for Ukraine, supplying helicopters for the first time. 3 former British military Sea Kings and 10,000 artillery rounds are being sent to Kyiv to help the country secure newly recaptured territory. The announcement follows the Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine at the weekend, where he pledged a further £50 million for air defence. Royal Mail says it's made a best and final offer in an attempt to end its dispute with the Communication Workers Union. The deal includes a pay rise of up to 9% over 18 months and a new profit share scheme for employees. It's hoped the offer will help to prevent a fresh 48-hour strike, which is due to be held on Thursday and Friday. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1962 and €1.1585. The price of gold is £1,451.63 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,466 points.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer clashed once more over the economy during PMQs. The Labour leader saying the Prime Minister was in denial and that the UK was facing that long recession, criticising the government for being forecast as having the lowest growth of any OECD nation in the next 2 years, 38th out of 38. Prime Minister, however, hitting back, defending the government's performance since 2010, mentioning this year's economic growth being the fastest in the G7, with unemployment at a multi-decade low. Let's reflect on the key moments once more.
Britain faces the lowest growth of any OECD nation over the next 2 years. Why?
Mr. Speaker, this country has experienced since 2010 the third highest growth in the G7. This year, the fastest growth in the G7, and unemployment at a multi-decade low. We're getting on to deliver more growth, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering free ports. We're investing in apprenticeships. We're protecting R&D. And if the Labour Party is serious about actually supporting growth, maybe they should get on the phone with their union paymasters and tell them to call off the strikes.
He's in total denial. We're bottom of the 38 OECD countries who are all in the same boat when it comes to COVID and Ukraine. And he wants a pat on the back. It's like a football manager, bottom of the league at Christmas, celebrating an away draw 3 months ago, and it won't wash. So they don't like their record, that's the problem. So let's try it another way. Why is Britain set to be the first country into recession and the last country out?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the Right Honourable Gentleman brought up the OECD report, because it contained actually 3 very important points. Firstly, it made the point that actually in the years following the pandemic, we're projected to have almost the highest growth amongst our peer countries. It also made the point, it was crystal clear that the challenges we face are completely international in nature. And thirdly, Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, it supported our fiscal plan because it's credible and ensures sustainability.
So those were the battle lines drawn on the economy. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, now. And Tom, clearly this is shaping up to be the battle for the election, but the majority of business then taken up with questions on this issue of Scottish independence. I think it was 6 SNP questions, a special question from Ian Blackford, and a former Prime Minister, Theresa May, also putting her 10 pennyworth in.
Yes, it shows what an effective campaigning force the SNP have become in Westminster, dominating the order paper despite their small numbers in Parliament. A huge proportion of the questions going to SNP members. They're getting their order paper question ballots in early and efficiently. And that meant that the Prime Minister time and time again had to face the challenge from the SNP that this is not a voluntary union of equals, but
I'm just going to break in. I'm just going to break in and take us away to Downing Street because we've just got some pictures coming in, which I hope we can show you now, having so rudely interrupted you. There we are, because the Prime Minister is meeting the South African President as they head indoors. Of course, this is the 2-day state visit, with Cyril Ramaphosa having attended that state banquet last night in Downing Street. The door closes. Tom, again, apologies for interrupting, but we just thought we'd bring that picture as the press photographers get back in position, because clearly this is a very important state visit, with Rishi Sunak having unveiled this, £5.37 billion joint partnership deal with South Africa. It's all about the economics as well as the politics.
It certainly is. This was President Ramaphosa arriving for a dinner, for a lunch, I should say, in Downing Street, not only after this formal bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister, which is shortly to take place, but followed by this lunch, not only with the Prime Minister, but also with the Trade Secretary and with the Foreign Secretary and a number of other senior individuals around the cabinet table. This is really about fostering a partnership between the United Kingdom and South Africa, which is, of course, the United Kingdom's largest trade partner on the continent of Africa as things stand. Developing that trade relationship even further is a very clear goal of this government, and of course this was something that was in the a long time being planned, because of course this was meant to take place, this state visit was meant to take place rather earlier, of course being delayed by the sad death of Her Majesty the Queen.
And of course, the Commonwealth so important to her, and that clearly being now emphasised by King Charles once more. But I mean, the question of trade deals, is pretty important to this government, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's totemic, really, of the promise of Brexit, which is something that, of course, faced some scrutiny earlier this week after a senior government figure was reported to have said that they would rather have a Swiss relationship with the EU, that being locked within some sort of regulatory orbit. And we know that the way that modern trade deals work isn't just about tariff scheduling, isn't just about not taxing imports and exports. It's also about what regulations you accept from your trading partner. What rules do you align or indeed say that you have equivalence of? And this is really the fundamental of modern trade. It's why the EU single market is held up by many trade experts as something that is really rather facilitating of trade. If everyone has the same rules, you don't have to stop things coming forward. But there's another way to do trade, which isn't about everyone having the same rules governed by the same system. There is a way to recognise other rules under what's called mutual recognition, and perhaps Britain is looking to do more of that in the way that we do our trade rather than harmonisation. But it all does come back to that question of the economy, which of course Sir Keir Starmer was predicating most of his questions at Prime Minister's questions on. The recent OECD report, which is not happy reading for people looking at the United Kingdom's growth rate, predicted growth rate, looking pretty sclerotic over the next few years. However, the Prime Minister was well briefed on this question and could point to the fact that this year year, the United Kingdom has the fastest growth in the G7, although predicted to drop off fairly sharply in the years to come. The real point, I think, was that this ended up being much more of a score draw for Sir Keir Starmer, going on to that sort of home turf that the Prime Minister was well briefed on over the issue of the economy, rather than more tricky issues of backbench rebellions, which were only fleetingly mentioned by the Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah, and of course, Rishi Sunak having a go at Keir Starmer over the issue of unions, which we'll come to in a moment. Tom, for the moment, thank you very much indeed with that score draw in Westminster. Just have to tell you, in Qatar, Germany 1, Japan 0, a penalty. More from Qatar with Paul a little later. But let's tell you now about those strikes, with ministers due to hold talks with the rail union, RMT in particular, because of the threatened strikes leading up to Christmas and in the new year. Mel Stride, the Work and Pensions Secretary, saying that we need more talking from the unions with the employers and less announcements of strikes. Well, the rail workers planning to stage 48-hour strikes this time, being held in the run-up to Christmas on the 13th, 14th, 16th and then 17th of December. Then also for the new year, more strikes set for the 3rd, 4th, 6th and 7th of January. Plus an overtime ban for rail workers between December the 18th and January the 2nd. Of course, many services and perhaps the cleaning of stations on overtime. Let's talk now to Michael Kill, CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association, who will be feeling the impact of this because, of course, this is I think they call it the golden quarter, Michael, when you try and make up money for the rest of the year, having, of course, been hit for, 2 or 3 years now with lockdowns as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, this is a really important sort of 3 months for us as a sector. It's the time where we build up our cash reserves so that we can survive the early parts of next year. And as you can understand, over the last 2 years, previous years, we've seen the pandemic hit us. Last year was more about rhetoric from government about people not going out. And now, as you can appreciate, the frustrations are rising because this strike action, although we talk about a 48-hour period, will also affect many services either side of that. And at such a critical time, and the period that has been chosen is a period where we see a lot of the Christmas parties, corporate events come out. So hugely worrying for our sector in a very, very difficult and fragile situation that we face through this period. And without a doubt will have an impact on next year.
And I guess the other aspect is that a lot of the workers, bar workers and in the hospitality trade, aren't members of a big union that have got the industrial muscle to actually fight on their behalf.
No, there are fragments of unions. It's something that has been discussed and is out there without a doubt. And I think it's an important part of us moving forward as a sector in terms of representation. But I think the one thing that, we pride ourselves on is looking after our staff. And safety is one of those sort of paramount positions that, we have seen the focus on over the last sort of couple of years. But more importantly, with things like the public sector transport being so weak after 11 o'clock, we've got a lot of work to do to ensure that our staff get home safely.
Actually, I was going to say that's a very good point, particularly for single females, whatever, getting a train safely rather than trying to sort of walk the streets to trying to a taxi or a car. That's a very important point.
It is, and I think this is missed. And you'll go to many places up and down the country, Manchester, Glasgow, etc., that really struggle with their infrastructure after 11 o'clock. And it's got to be something that has got to be considered when you look at nighttime economy strategy in particular, and fusing that sort of transport infrastructure in terms of late night economy, early hours of the morning. So not only staff but workers throughout the night are able to get about, but more importantly, consumers can get about on safe, recognised transport networks, because they are going to be a particular reliance, particularly around things like tourist cities, which, people have good experiences, and if they have good experiences, they'll return. So we have a worry now that these strikes, where they've had so sporadic sort of action, they're really going to start to impact on consumer confidence right the way across the board for our sector.
On sentiment, yeah. Michael, as ever, thanks for joining us here in GB News, and we wish you a prosperous Christmas and New Year, if that's possible. Thanks very much indeed. Let's now speak to Peter Edwards, former editor of the Labour List, an online publication supporting the Labour Party. Peter, thanks for joining us. The barb from Rishi Sunak to Keir Starmer was get on the phone to your union paymasters. Clearly, the whole issue of strikes is rather delicate for Labour to actually walk the line.
Yes, it's very sensitive for Labour, but there's a lot of political game playing by Rishi Sunak, and that's sad to see. First of all, the Conservatives have been in government for 12 years, running our railways for 12 years, so they should take responsibility. It's also worth pointing out that there's actually public support for people fighting for fair pay. And if, like this rail union, you've been offered 4% and inflation's around 10%, and you've got rent or mortgage to pay, husband or wife and children to feed, it's perfectly reasonable that your pay goes up in line with inflation. And of course, the RMT, although we're supportive of the unions, the RMT is not affiliated with Labour. So I think there's a lot of nonsense coming from the Conservative government. And it was slightly the same under Boris Johnson Liz Truss, in the sense of it's very easy to criticise the unions, but it's much harder to actually come up with a solution.
Problem this time, and that is inflation. And of course, if these pay awards do go through, that's going to feed yet more into inflation. And clearly the government has got to try and keep a lid on that.
Well, the government has a job of trying to keep everyone happy. So first of all, if you're a train driver, male or female, old or young, you shouldn't see the amount of disposable income and the amount you have to pay for food cut because of failures in macroeconomic policy or transport policy elsewhere. But secondly, inflation, you know, I'm very sceptical about this idea that if you give one industry the pay rise that they deserve, that's purely flat in real terms, that's inflationary. You have to look at the causes of inflation. It's because we haven't invested in our energy infrastructure and we've become reliant on other countries, particularly Russia. We haven't invested in growing enough of our own food, like maize. We get grain from Ukraine, and of course, in this area, we haven't invested in transport infrastructure, which is why, for example, in London, Oyster or metro fares are much higher than Paris or Tokyo. So it pains me to say it, but you know, the cost of living crisis is largely, with the exception of the war in Ukraine, largely made on these shores.
Peter, thank you very much indeed for your view. Former editor of Labour List, thanks very much for joining us. But let's head back now to the other politics of the day, that Scottish independence ruling from the Supreme Court, saying that the Scottish Government cannot hold their independence referendum without the UK Government consent. Well, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon wanting that referendum on the 19th of October next year. The court saying, though, she does not have the power to do so. Well, let's actually get the views now of Conservative member of the Scottish Parliament, Donald Cameron. Donald, clearly, in terms of Westminster, it dominated the affairs today because the SNP indicating now, even though we've had the legal decision, it's not constitutional or democratic in their view.
That's what they're saying, and it's dominated events up here, obviously too.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing I think to say is that we welcome the ruling that the Supreme Court have made. It's been unequivocal, it's been unanimous, and it's been very clear that the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the authority to legislate for a referendum without the agreement of the UK Parliament too, and that the Constitution is a reserved matter to the UK Parliament. And let's not forget that Nicola Sturgeon was the one who introduced the referendum bill. She was the one that chose to litigate in the Supreme Court, and in so doing has wasted hundreds of thousands of taxpayers' pounds in taking it to court.
The SNP's position is, of course, they believe they have their mandate because of the number of elections that they've won. Given that, Nicola Sturgeon indicating perhaps that the general election, as she sees it, will be the ultimate referendum, the mandate given on that. I mean, is that a possibility that everyone north of the border will have to fight the election on the issue of independence?
Well, we don't accept that should be the case. You know, if the SNP want to focus on their obsession with independence at the expense of all the other issues that they should be concentrating on, the NHS, education, ferries, all the issues that in their day job they should be focusing on, that's a matter for them. But the Scottish Conservatives will be fighting that election on the priorities of people here in Scotland. So, for example, in Scotland tomorrow, we have our first teacher strike in over 30 years. And when I talk to people, you know, on a day-to-day, on the doorsteps, those are the issues that people are worried about, not another constitutional argy-bargy, and not the SNP's relentless obsession with independence.
OK, well, on that note of constitutional argy-bargy, Angus, thank you very much indeed for joining us there at the Scottish Parliament building. And let's bring in, Angus MacNeil, rather, a Scottish National Party MP, for his views to balance the issue. Just been discussing, of course, this whole idea from Nicola Sturgeon about making the general election the mandate, if you like, or the referendum on independence. That's going to be very difficult for you.
Not really. Scotland's joining the United Kingdom predates the 1998 Act, and the Supreme Court today spoke about the 1998 Act and the fact that a creature created by the Westminster Parliament, the devolved Parliament at Holyrood, doesn't have the power to have a referendum, to hold a referendum on independence. One door closes, but many other doors open. We now have the situation where we will have to choose an election, and which election? Perhaps by many elections. So the opportunities for Scottish independence have grown infinitely as a result of the Supreme Court's ruling.
Right.
And another point to note is the freedom and the ease members of the European Union can leave. It's very clear nobody else interferes. It's left to that member. But in the UK, it ain't so free, and it ain't left to that member. So there's a clear distinction of freedom of nations and exactly what this court ruling means. But I see a lot of opportunities from this court ruling this morning.
But Nicola Sturgeon, I think I'm right in saying in her speech, was indicating that the general election would be, in her view, the real test for this to go to the voters. Given that, I mean, isn't that rather self-indulgent, given the state of the NHS north of the border, where we're being told there are discussions for a two-tier system, given the whole discussion over what's happened with Scottish ferry contracts? People may actually think, well, the SNP haven't done that good a job north of the border, let's kick them out.
Well, in a democracy, the people can do what they want, and we want them to be able to choose as they want, and the Westminster government doesn't. But it's because of all these issues. You know, we know that the middle earners in France are 20% wealthier than the middle earners in the UK, that the lower earners in France are 25% wealthier, that the 5% of the poorest in independent Ireland, independent from the UK incidentally, are 63% wealthier than those in the UK. So it's because of those very reasons that we want independence. We want to move our society on. We want to do that through governments we elect, with policies we want, not the economic zealots and crazies that we have with the Tories for the last number of years that have left the UK in a very perilous situation. It is number 32 in the OECD League of 32. Leading the way, incidentally, are Ireland and Malta. It places the UK newspapers and media mocked on their way to independence. He who laughs last laughs best, and the Supreme Court has given us a lot of opportunities for a lot of times to ask the Scottish people if they want independence. I'm sure we'll win it the first time, but I don't think that some of the unionist side quite understand the situation as it is now. All has changed, and changed utterly.
Yeah, although, of course, they would point out that that was the vote and that should be there for a decade. But, however, out of time, Angus MacNeil at Westminster, thank you.
Democracy is not a full stop.
OK.
Democracy is not a full stop.
A hyphen or a pause, maybe.
You can ask the people whenever.
But I'm going to have to put a full stop on it there anyway. Angus, thank you very much for joining us there at Westminster. We'll speak to you again, no doubt, as the debate continues. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Coming up, plenty more for you with reaction to the Prime Minister's questions and that Supreme Court ruling. But let's take a look at the weather for you now.
It's been a wet morning for much of the UK, but things turning brighter this afternoon. Some sunny spells coming through, but a whole host of blustery showers as well, particularly in the west, where they will be accompanied by gusty winds. This low pressure, and in particular this weather front, made for a very soggy start. A zone of rain working its way eastwards, the isobars squeezing together behind it, blowing in plenty of showers. But that rain is now starting to pull away from the east, heading out into the North Sea, lingering perhaps across the northern parts of Scotland. Brighter skies following, but also lots of showers already into Wales and northwest England. More showers feeding into southwest England. A few getting to the Midlands, but I suspect much of eastern England will be dry this afternoon. It should brighten up across Aberdeenshire by the very end of the day. Single figures generally across the north. double digits the high further south. But blustery, so feeling cool with that gusty wind continuing to pile plenty of showers into Wales, southwest England this evening. Some quite heavy ones around as well, but they fade. We'll keep some showers going in western Scotland, but many places will become dry overnight, clear, but enough of a breeze to stop temperatures getting too close to freezing, mostly about 4 to 6 to start Thursday. We'll start with quite a bit of sunshine across these central and eastern parts, but here comes another band of rain. Now this will zip through, but it will be pretty heavy as it crosses Northern Ireland in the morning, then gets into Wales and southwest England, western parts of Scotland before heading into the Midlands around the middle part of the day. An hour or two of pretty intense rain zipping through and a gusty wind. Much of the east will be dry again, temperatures perhaps a little higher tomorrow, double digits, 11 to 12 Celsius. A wet evening across parts of the east as that rain finally shimmies through, and guess what? It's followed by clear spells and more showers, again coming in on a fairly gusty wind as we head into Friday. But actually, not too many showers around on Friday, looking largely dry. There will be another spell of rain crossing the country this weekend and slowly turning a bit milder.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deems & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
And a very warm welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up this hour, our exclusive report, we hear from rough sleepers in Blackpool who say they've become invisible after hundreds of asylum seekers were instead moved into hotels in the seaside town. The Home Secretary has also been questioned over her dealing with the migrant crisis by MP Suella Braverman admitting that the government had failed to control the UK's borders. More on all of that from our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. The Supreme Court's ruled that any decision to grant Scotland a second independence referendum can only be made by the UK government. But the SNP says their battle isn't over. We'll be discussing what happens next. Plus, will England's World Cup captain Harry Kane be fit for the next match? The latest from Doha and hearing from teammate 2 goalkeeper Jordan Pickford. And as ever, email us with your thoughts on all the stories of the day, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before that, the latest news headlines with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. Just 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Scotland's First Minister says the next general election will act as a de facto referendum.
The Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
Well, Well, it's after the UK government won its legal battle against a second Scottish independent referendum in the Supreme Court. Nicola Sturgeon accused Westminster of blocking the vote as a route to independence. She also says a special SNP conference will be held in the new year to determine how to move forward.
A so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even to ask itself the question, cannot be described in any way as voluntary or even a partnership at all. So this ruling confirms that the notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership of nations, if it ever was a reality, is no longer a reality. And that exposes a situation that is quite simply unsustainable.
The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has welcomed the Supreme Court ruling and called for politicians to work together.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying we respect the clear and definitive ruling of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And what I would say to the honourable gentleman, that firstly, I am looking forward to also seeing the moderator of Scotland tomorrow. And I think that the people of Scotland want us to be working on fixing the major challenges that we collectively face, whether that's the economy, supporting the NHS, or indeed supporting Ukraine. Now is the time for politicians to work together, and that's what this government will do.
To other news now. Some homeless people have accused the government of prioritising illegal migrants over their welfare. More than 300 mostly male asylum seekers have been staying at the Metropole Hotel on Blackpool's seafront for the past year. A homeless group in the city, which includes an armed forces veteran, have been speaking to GB News. They say they're living rough on the streets while Channel migrants are put up in a nearby hotel.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here, and with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets. It's wrong.
The Home Secretary is blaming the growing migrant crisis on extenuating circumstances. Appearing today before the Home Affairs Committee, Suella Braverman said accepting Ukrainians who were forced to flee the war has had an impact on processing asylum seekers here. She also says the thousands of migrants crossing the Channel in small boats are at fault by crossing illegally.
I've never seen 40,000 people arrive in the UK through dangerous and illegal means. We've never had 140,000 people welcomed in good faith, and rightly so, from Ukraine, who are, to some degree, taking up some of our accommodation. We've never seen, in addition to that, another 80,000 people who we are accommodating who are waiting for their asylum claims. That all takes up beds and accommodation.
The Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says the government is simply failing to get a grip on the problem.
The hotel's not been taken over by migrants. What's happened is the Home Office has ended up booking hotels in places like Blackpool and around the country to put people up for extended periods of time because of their own failure to process applications, and it's costing a fortune. So it is the Home Office and their system failures.
Royal Mail says it's made a best and final offer in an attempt to end its dispute with the Communication Workers Union. The deal includes a pay rise of up to 9% over 18 months and a new profit share scheme for employees. Union members have held a series of strikes in recent weeks, which Royal Mail says has cost the company £100 million. A fresh 48-hour strike is due to be held on Thursday and Friday. Millions of pensioners will get a cash boost from today as part of the government's expanded winter fuel payment scheme. 11.6 million people will receive up to £600 to help with their energy bills. The government says most payments will be automatic, with households getting the money in their bank accounts over the next 2 months. The UK is escalating its support for Ukraine, supplying helicopters for the first time. The government sending 3 former British military Sea Kings to Kyiv. A further 10,000 artillery rounds are also being sent to help Ukraine secure newly recaptured territory. The announcement follows the Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine at the weekend, where he pledged a further £50 million for air defence. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, back to Mark.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. Let's bring you some breaking news now. We're getting on the investigation into Dominic Raab's behaviour, the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister. You remember that he referred himself to an independent investigation regarding formal complaints made about his behaviour. We're now being told that Rishi Sunak has appointed a senior commercial and employment lawyer, Adam Tolley KC, to lead that investigation. No indication as yet when that will start, but just to remind you that Dominic Raab saying he thoroughly rebutted and refuted any claims made about his behaviour, but the latest suggested that civil servants had been unhappy about the way that senior staff were spoken to, allegations even that tomatoes were thrown across one room. All that to be investigated now by senior commercial and employment lawyer Adam Tolley. More reaction on that as we get it. But to return now to what we heard with Rosie in the headlines, invisible is the term that homeless people in Blackpool have used, one of the UK's most deprived towns, to claim they've become invisible to those authorities prioritising housing Channel migrants over their own citizens, they say. The group, including young people and an armed forces veteran, say they're being forced now to sleep on the streets, while more than 300 asylum seekers are staying in the comfort of one of the town's historic hotels. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has this exclusive report.
It's illumination season in Blackpool, but amidst the bright lights, there's a darker side to this tourist town. Down at street level, in the shadows, are Blackpool's forgotten. The homeless and the vulnerable are growing increasingly resentful, as one of the town's historic hotels plays host to more than 300 Channel migrants, just yards from where they're forced to sleep rough on the streets.
I'm invisible. I am literally invisible. People walk past. They don't even see you now.
Sketch has been sleeping rough in Blackpool for months. His story sums up the absurdity of the Channel migrant crisis and will serve only to stoke the anger felt by many. Inside this hotel, mainly young men who paid criminal gangs to cross the Channel illegally. While life for Sketch and friend Gaz, an army veteran, seems almost unbearably miserable. With post-traumatic stress, his downward spiral eventually left Gaz on the streets. He didn't want to talk on camera, but Sketch sums up the anger they all feel and what they see as the injustice of their treatment, in stark contrast to the migrants nearby.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here, and with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
With 50,000 hotel and bed and breakfast rooms across Blackpool, it's an obvious target for Home Office contractors looking for more asylum seeker accommodation. Indeed, the travel group linked to this hotel and 4 others in Blackpool confirmed to us they've been approached and offered a large sum of money by a company looking to acquire 3 hotels in the area for migrant use. They've said no at the moment, but the operations director admits the offer is tempting.
The industry itself is extremely difficult at the minute, so when something like that comes along where you're guaranteed a year and and you're full all the time and the rates that they're looking to pay for that, then yeah, I can see quite easily why it could be considered by somebody.
The area's Conservative MP says he'll be on the front line of any protests against new migrant hotels.
My inbox is already full of people who can't get a council house, can't get an NHS dentist, a GP appointment, and the idea that you can locate 300 asylum seekers in the UK's most deprived ward, which is where they are currently being hosted, without that wraparound support is complete and utter madness.
Blackpool's forgotten are desperate for help, but as authorities here are forced to house growing numbers of asylum seekers, Sketch and his companions are, it seems, way down the list of priorities.
It's hard. Last night, an elderly friend of ours fell ill and we found the ambulance. He was close to death.
And as this resort heads into the winter months,
life for those living rough on its streets will only get harder. Mark White, GB News, Blackpool.
Well, some breaking news on this story now. The government is saying it will aim to improve how it communicates with local councils and MPs when hotels in their areas are chosen to house asylum seekers. That's according to Home Office Minister Robert Jenrick, who's told the Commons that numbers of migrants at the Manston Processing Centre had fallen from more than 4,000 to 0 today. Our Home and Security Editor Mark White is here to update us because, Mark, you were on the streets there of Blackpool reporting what was happening with those homeless people. Home Office Minister Robert Jenrick reacting to this pretty quickly, it seems.
Yes, because, you know, local MPs are coming back at him, Conservative MPs as well, and saying they are very, very concerned about the situation, the lack of proper and constructive liaison with the local authorities in areas such as Blackpool, when these contractors are reaching out to hotel owners in the area. As we found out during our report, they're looking to acquire 3 new hotels in the Blackpool area, which the local MP, Scott Benton, says is just not acceptable. There's no way that this, one of the most deprived areas in the UK, could cope with another 3 hotels and hundreds more asylum seekers. And Robert Jenrick said, as well as improving the coordination and cooperation with local authorities, they are looking to try to end the reliance on hotels in the first place. They want to move to the model of trying to find bigger accommodation centres. This is what he told the Commons a short time ago.
In the medium term, of course, we're committed to moving to a full dispersal accommodation model. That would be a fairer and cheaper model, and we continue to pursue larger accommodation sites that are decent but not luxurious, because we want to make sure that those in our care are supported appropriately, but that the UK is a less attractive destination for asylum shoppers and economic migrants. And that's exactly what the Home Secretary and I intend to achieve.
Now, to underline the sensitivity of this, in that same session, we got Conservative MP Philip Hollowbone, MP for Kettering, suggesting that Robert Jenrick should resign. The situation is now so bad and chaotic, the Minister should consider his position. And, of course, we had Suella Braverman herself at Home Affairs Committee acknowledging that the government had lost control of our borders, the UK borders.
Yes, and it's not surprising that Conservative MPs are as vocal as they are at the moment, even some, as we've heard, going as far as to say that heads should roll over this, because they need to send the right messages loud and clear back to the constituents, and that message is, the government might be doing this, but it's not me, Gov. Yeah. Honestly, I'm on your side.
I said no, yeah. Where would these new areas be? Because we remember a camp was used, I think, in Yorkshire, wasn't it? And the local community was not happy with that happening. I mean, the government is going to face the same difficulties moving all these people who are awaiting the air asylum claims to actually be gone through into, what, ex-forces camps, RAF camps and so on?
Well, this is it. I mean, it almost seems to the casual observer that the government is being bounced into one bad decision after another, because they had this policy of trying to introduce these larger camps, these not processing centres, but camps where they could house refugees. And one was, as you said there, Linton-on-Ouse up in Yorkshire, by the RAF base there, the former RAF base. But people in that village were up in arms because the population of the village is just over 500. They were planning to put 1,500 asylum seekers at least there. That would have tripled the population of the village, and clearly was very, very concerning for the local people there. They objected to it. The local council was going to challenge that in the High Court. So the government, in conjunction with the Ministry of Defence, dropped those plans. Well, it now seems like they're resurrecting that policy again to look for other sites similar to Linton-on-Ouse, but I suspect they will run into the same problems of people who do not want these large numbers of asylum seekers in their local area.
From one migrant crisis to another. Mark, thank you for updating us, and of course we'll continue to see what Robert Jenrick says there in the Chamber to respond to those questions. Thank you very much indeed. Well, elsewhere in the Commons today, of course, the reaction to the Supreme Court ruling against the Scottish Government's plans for a second independence referendum. The SNP continuing to insist that the 2021 election gives them a clear mandate to hold that vote. However, in response to Ian Blackford's urgent questions earlier, Secretary of State Alistair Jack said this idea that there was a mandate delivered in 2022 is completely misleading. Less than 1/3 of the Scottish electorate voted for the SNP, he said. Well, let's get an update now with our political reporter Olivia Utley, who's in Edinburgh. Olivia, we'll talk about the Scottish situation in a moment. First, just update everyone with this news that Adam Tolley KC is to establish the specific facts over the formal complaints over Dominic Raab, and he is a commercial lawyer, and therefore we assume that this really is independent, with Dominic Raab having effectively put himself forward for that independent investigation.
Yes, so the background is that Dominic Raab wanted to clear his name, so has asked the Prime Minister for an independent investigation into his behaviour. What we know so far is that Adam Tolley is going to be investigating 2 specific formal complaints against Dominic Raab, one from his time at the Ministry of Justice and one from his time as Foreign Secretary. These complaints have been made by senior civil servants, and those civil servants say that they want to stand shoulder to shoulder with more junior civil servants. There's a question mark at the moment over whether Adam Tolley could investigate more than just those 2 formal complaints. Apparently there have been a handful, they say, of formal complaints against Dominic Raab now, as well as more informal complaints about a culture of fear that he allegedly established at the Ministry of Justice. So it's not quite clear how far his remit will extend at the moment. But yes, as you say, this is a very independent investigation, and the results will be made public, which hasn't always been the case with ministerial investigations. So one way or another, Raab will either clear his name, or if he gets dragged any further into this mire, it's hard to see how he could stay in government.
Yeah, and interesting that people are identifying Adam Tolley as a commercial and employment law specialist. So all those aspects of HR will be coming into play.
Yes, absolutely. Rishi Sunak made clear that he wanted professionalism and integrity to be at the heart of his government, and in choosing Adam Tolley for this job, who is an employment law specialist, he's shown that he's serious about that. His critics can't really say anything now against what Rishi Sunak has done, but of course, if Dominic Raab is found to be guilty of the accusations that that have been made against him, then you could see Rishi Sunak losing a very, very senior and very close ally.
Now, let's talk about Scotland, where you are, and it's the focus not just there in the Scottish Parliament, of course, but down in Westminster. 6 members of the SNP with questions at PMQs, all after this legal ruling, which doesn't seem to have settled matters.
No, shockingly, it hasn't settled matters. What the UK government was really hoping for wasn't a win, but actually for the Supreme Court to throw out the case altogether. The problem with this win for the UK government is that it means that Nicola Sturgeon can now argue that Westminster has placed a roadblock, a constitutional roadblock in the way of Scottish democracy. And that is the argument that we're seeing from SNP MPs this afternoon, that Westminster has essentially put Scottish democracy in a stranglehold, and they're now conflating the case of Scottish democracy with independence and saying that without independence there is no future for Scottish democracy because Westminster will keep blocking it, is their argument. Now, I've spoken to Conservative and Labour MPs and MSPs this afternoon who say that Nicola Sturgeon won't be able to turn the next general election into a de facto referendum, which is what she's threatening to do, because there are just too many issues facing Scotland. The SNP are under pressure to sort out the drug problem in Scotland, schools in Scotland, the NHS, the ferry problem. All of these issues are raining down on Nicola Sturgeon at once. So it is going to be quite difficult for her to try and turn this election round and turn it into just an independence referendum. I think what we're going to keep hearing, we heard it from Theresa May, we heard it from Donald Cameron MSP just now on GB News, is that the SNP is obsessed with independence at the expense of all the other issues in Scotland. So that is the state of play this afternoon.
Thank you very much for updating us there for Edinburgh and, of course, Westminster as well, indirectly semi-detached. Thank you very much, Olivia, for the latest. And, of course, that Dominic Raab issue that Olivia was indicating. As we say, Adam Tolley's investigation will establish the specific facts surrounding the formal complaints made against Mr Raab at the Ministry of Justice and the Foreign Office. That just coming through on the latest. Coming up, World Cup, Friday's World Cup clash. Will Harry Kane, the captain, be fit for the clash with the USA? The latest live from Doha coming up. And also hearing from England's goalie, Jordan Pickford. First, a look at the weather.
It's been a wet morning for much of the UK, but things turning brighter this afternoon. Some sunny spells coming through, but a whole host of blustery showers as well, particularly in the west, where they will be accompanied by gusty winds. This low pressure, and in particular this weather front, made for a very soggy start. A zone of rain working its way eastwards, the isobar squeezing together behind it, blowing in plenty of showers. But that rain is now starting to pull away from the east, heading out into the North Sea, lingering perhaps across the northern parts of Scotland. Brighter skies following, but also lots of showers already into Wales and northwest England. More showers feeding into southwest England. A few getting to the Midlands, but I suspect much of eastern England will be dry this afternoon. It should brighten up across Aberdeenshire by the very end of the day. Single figures generally across the north. Double digits the high further south, but blustery, so feeling cool with that gusty wind continuing to pile plenty of showers into Wales, southwest England this evening. Some quite heavy ones around as well, but they fade. We'll keep some showers going in western Scotland, but many places will become dry overnight, clear, but enough of a breeze to stop temperatures getting too close to freezing, mostly about 4 to 6 to start Thursday. We'll start with quite a bit of sunshine across these central and eastern parts, but here comes another band of rain. Now, this will zip through, but it will be pretty heavy as it crosses Northern Ireland in the morning, then gets into Wales and southwest England, western parts of Scotland, before heading into the Midlands around the middle part of the day. An hour or two of pretty intense rain zipping through and a gusty wind. Much of the east will be dry again. Temperatures perhaps a little higher tomorrow, double digits, 11 to 12 Celsius. A wet evening across parts of the east as that rain finally shimmies through. And guess what? It's followed by clear spells and more showers, again coming in on a fairly gusty wind as we head into Friday. But actually, not too many showers around on Friday, looking largely dry. There will be another spell of rain crossing the country this weekend and slowly turning a bit milder.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, if you're an England football fan, you may have been a little nervous about Friday's World Cup clash with the USA after Harry Kane was taken off in the game with Iran on Monday with a crocked ankle. Was it a slight limp or something more serious? Well, he's had a scan. What's it shown? Let's get the latest live from Doha with our man in the souk, Paul Hawkins. Paul, is it good or bad news for Friday?
Good news, it seems. It's not serious. They had a scan on it, and it looks like it's going to be okay. There was an England press conference this afternoon, 3:30 Doha time, attended by the England keeper Jordan Pickford, and he confirmed that Harry Kane's injury doesn't look too bad. He did train today. This is what he had to say.
It's good. Probably be a little bit sore, but I think he's fine. He's out on the grass today with us, so that's good. And he's our captain, and I think he's fine. Yeah. I think when Harry came off, about 70 minutes, Callum come on and played really well. Got the assist for Jack. He was very unselfish and gave Jack his goal. And I think everyone's training really hard. Everyone's here for a reason to play football. And yeah, but obviously Harry is an unbelievable player. He sets the example in the squad. He's the leader, he's the captain.
So that's Jordan Pickford confirming that it looks like Harry Kane will be okay for Friday's game against the USA. The Welsh FA also held a press conference earlier today, but nothing really big coming out of that. All the players seemingly 100% fit for that game against Iran on Friday. This is what some England fans had to say earlier today when we were asking them about Harry Kane's potential injury and also the game against the USA on Friday. How do you feel about the fact that he looks like he's going to be fit for Friday's game?
I think that's great. You know, hoping England can have a strong showing, except I'm from the U.S., so kind of divided loyalties. It's hard to pick one team over the other, but I do love Harry Kane. He's a great player.
Yeah, they beat Messi. I don't think obviously no one thought that they would do it, but obviously they've come through. Saudi Arabia have done it. They were dressing in national dress for Qatar. Qatar didn't get the chance to really push through like Saudi have done, but maybe they will in the next couple of games. Who knows?
I think England have definitely got a good chance of probably winning the group, and then yeah, I think we've probably even got a good chance of winning it. I think we've kind of not really been considered for it, but I think there's a really strong chance.
So that's the football, Paul, but the politics, it seems, still won't go away. We've got Germany having put their hands over their mouth with the official photo before the match with Japan, indicating their concern about the issue of gay rights. And now Denmark suggesting they may be speaking to other countries about leaving FIFA over the issue.
Yeah, it's not going away, is it? FIFA saying that you'll get a yellow card if you wear the armband and hoping that draws a line under it. The Germans are having none of it. The Danish are having none of it. The Germans tweeting this photo with them, a team photo before kick-off against Japan, where it's currently 1-0 to the Germans. They tweeted a photo with their hands over their mouth, saying that taking away our armband is like taking away their voice. And in fact, the German Interior Minister was actually in the stands with FIFA boss Gianni Infantino. And earlier, at a German FA event, she said this is not all right how federations are being put under pressure. It is incomprehensible that FIFA does not want people people to openly stand for tolerance and against discrimination. Now, we haven't heard from FIFA's official response to that, but one would have thought FIFA would say, look, we've got a no discrimination campaign, we've brought that forward, so we do stand against discrimination. But the countries are not letting go of this. The Danish FA and the Germans are looking at potentially legal action against FIFA, and they're consulting on that, potentially looking at whether it was illegal for FIFA to sanction their players with a yellow card for not wearing that armband. So this issue not going away at all.
Paul, as ever, thank you for updating us there with another busy evening there in the souk. People enjoying themselves. All the latest from Qatar as we get it. But what about your views on this? Do you think England, like Denmark, should be discussing actually leaving FIFA and making more of this issue of LGBT rights out in Qatar? Let us know at GBViews at gbnews.uk. Time, though, for a news update now with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 2:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Scotland's First Minister says the next general election will act as a de facto referendum.
The Scottish Parliament does not have the power to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence.
It's after the UK government won a legal battle in the Supreme Court, preventing a second Scottish independence vote from being held. Nicola Sturgeon accused Westminster of blocking the referendum as a route to independence. She also says a special SNP conference will be held next year to determine how to move forward.
A so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even to ask itself the question, cannot be described in any way as voluntary or even a partnership at all. So this ruling confirms that the notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership of nations, if it ever was a reality, is no longer a reality. And that exposes a situation that is quite simply unsustainable.
Some homeless people have accused the government of prioritising illegal migrants over their welfare. More than 300, mostly male asylum seekers, have been staying at the Metropole Hotel on Blackpool's seafront for the past year. A homeless group in the city, which includes an armed forces veteran, have been speaking to GB News. They say they're living rough on the streets while Channel migrants are given accommodation.
It's wrong because you're looking at the real homeless here. And with them putting them in there and then leaving us on the streets, it's wrong.
The Prime Minister has appointed a senior lawyer to investigate bullying claims against the Deputy Prime Minister. Dominic Raab requested an independent inquiry after 2 formal complaints were made. He says he's confident he'll be cleared of any wrongdoing. Adam Tolley KC, who specialises in commercial and employment law, will lead the investigation. Royal Mail says it's made a best and final offer in an attempt to end its dispute with the Communication Workers Union. The deal includes a pay rise of up to 9% over 18 months and a new profit share scheme for employees. It's hoped the offer will help to prevent a fresh 48-hour strike due to be held on Thursday and Friday. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Mark will be back in a moment.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, more on that Supreme Court landmark ruling over Scottish independence. Reacting to the news earlier, Nicola Sturgeon saying she respected the court's decision, but added that the ruling exposed as a myth that the UK was a voluntary union. Let's remind you of what she said.
It must be clear today that the Supreme Court does not make the law, it interprets and applies the law. If the devolution settlement in the Scotland Act is inconsistent with any reasonable notion of Scottish democracy, as now seems to be the case, that is the fault of Westminster lawmakers, not the justices of the Supreme Court. In addressing the implications of today's ruling, it's also important to be mindful of what the court was not asked to decide, and therefore what the ruling does not tell us. The court was not asked to decide if there is a democratic mandate for a referendum. The mandate and the parliamentary majority for a referendum is quite simply undeniable. Nor was the court asked if Scotland should be independent. Only the Scottish people can be the judge of that.
Well, let's see what the Scottish Liberal Democrats leader makes of that. Alex Cole-Hamilton joining us now. Alex, thanks for your time. It seems this definitive ruling from the court, but not definitive in terms of the politics by any means.
Well, no, this is an embarrassing result for both the First Minister of Scotland and the Scottish National Party. It's also a colossal waste of taxpayers' money. It's clear, it's been manifest for some time that the will of the people or the interests of the people do not lie with another divisive referendum on independence. My mailbag is filled with correspondence from people who are dreading opening their electricity bills, who are waiting in pain for hospital treatment that isn't coming, and who are concerned about things like the climate emergency and the war in Ukraine. This is so far down our list of priorities as a nation, and yet it has starved everything else of media oxygen. I think it's time for the Scottish Government to recognise that the writing is on the wall and move on with the business of government and delivering on those issues.
OK, the problem is, though, Ian Blackford for the SNP in Westminster earlier was indicating that the SNP had won 8 elections in a row since 2014, indicating that the party has a mandate in Scotland to push for a referendum. Therefore, shouldn't they get that wish and see what emerges and then discuss the way forward?
Well, we had a referendum just 8 years ago, and the result of that was quite clear. So actually, to then talk about the electoral mandates, let's unpack what that actually means. If you look at the last Scottish parliamentary election, the most recent electoral test of public opinion in Scotland, pro-independence supporting parties failed to secure more than 50% of the population. More people voted for parties that support our place in the United Kingdom than do not. And also, every opinion poll you've seen for the last probably 6 to 9 months is saying that the public have no interest in seeing a referendum on Nicola Sturgeon's timetable. Why? Because they're worried about their electricity bills, because they've got an operation that's been cancelled, or then they're in a waiting list. 1 in 7 Scots currently in a waiting list right now. These are the priorities that matter to people.
Therefore, what do you make of Nicola Sturgeon's indication that they would make the next general election another vote, another mandate on the issue of independence, and that, she said, would be the real test?
I think that's unspeakably arrogant. I don't think it's for a single politician to tell the public of this country what an election's about. That's what they do. The public give us our instructions. It's for them to decide. You don't get to say this is about our pet project. And for another party, the Greens, that are in coalition, have signalled that they too will fight this coming election, the general election, on a one-line manifesto to break up the United Kingdom. I'm sorry, but they must be the only environmental party in the country, in the world rather, Green Party in the world, that have surrendered their environmentalism for nationalism. And if they won't fight the climate emergency, Scottish Liberal Democrats will.
Yeah. So what happens next then in that case? Because clearly the SNP is not going to go away either in Edinburgh or in Westminster.
Well, I mean, my sincere hope is that we get a bit of respite. The general election is unlikely to be within the next 2 years, or it will be 2 years away. And we have some real meaty issues. We're not, thank goodness, going to be snarled up with the legislative process around an unwanted referendum bill. We can get on with the business of government. There's now £20 million available, which was earmarked for a referendum next year. I'd like to see that spent on treating long COVID in Scotland. We were spending half the amount of money that we were on a referendum on those suffering from that debilitating condition. So I hope we get back to the business of good government, because my goodness, our constituents who sent us to this Parliament want us to do exactly that.
OK, Alex Cole-Hamilton from the Liberal Democrats there in Edinburgh, thanks very much for bringing us your reaction. Well, we mentioned Westminster, staying with that. PMQs today, of course, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer clashing over the economy before we heard all those questions about Scotland. Labour's leader saying that the Prime Minister was in denial and that the UK was facing a long recession, criticising the government for being seeing the lowest growth forecast of any OECD nation over the next 2 years. Prime Minister, though, hit back, defending the government's performance since 2010, mentioning this year's economic growth being the fastest in the G7, with unemployment, he said, at a multi-decade low. Let's have a recap of those key moments.
Britain faces the lowest growth of any OECD nation over the next 2 years. Why?
Mr. Speaker, this country has experienced since 2010 the third highest growth in the G7. This year, the fastest growth in the G7, and unemployment at a multi-decade low. We're getting on to deliver more growth, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering free ports. We're investing in apprenticeships. We're protecting R&D. And if the Labour Party is serious about actually supporting growth, maybe they should get on the phone with their union paymasters and tell them to call off the strikes.
He's in total denial. We're bottom of the 38 OECD countries who are all in the same boat when it comes to COVID and Ukraine. And he wants a pat on the back. It's like a football manager, bottom of the league at Christmas, celebrating an away draw 3 months ago, and it won't wash. So they don't like their record, that's the problem. So let's try it another way. Why is Britain set to be the first country into recession and the last country out?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the Right Honourable Gentleman brought up the OECD report, because it contained actually 3 very important points. Firstly, it made the point that actually in the years following the pandemic, we're projected to have almost the highest growth amongst our peer countries. It also made the point, it was crystal clear that the challenges we face are completely international in nature. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, it supported our fiscal plan because it's credible and ensures sustainability.
So that was PMQs. Let's get more reaction in Downing Street with our political reporter, Catherine Foster. Catherine, we have to just indicate that we may see the South African president emerge from that door behind you. So we'll bring that, of course, as it happens. But let's talk about PMQs now, with clearly the battle lines drawn for the election. But the Tory backbenchers in rather better voice than they were previously.
Yes, this is the 4th encounter between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. A couple of weeks ago, when Rishi Sunak was last doing it, it was rather flat. He felt a bit deflated. Better performance today, I would say. I would put it down as a draw. Obviously, Keir Starmer had many targets to go on, chose to go hard on the state of the economy following last week's autumn statement. But Rishi Sunak, having been Chancellor of the Exchequer for the last couple of years, of course, until becoming Prime Minister, had all his answers prepared. So on that comment you just showed about the lowest rate in the next couple of years, the OECD, he came straight back and said, yes, but the UK's got the fastest growth in the G7 this year, which is true. OK, it's going to drop very dramatically next year, but nevertheless, he was ready with his answers. He's very keen to paint the Conservatives, the autumn statement, as being compassionate, as being fair, as protecting the most vulnerable, people on benefits, people on pensions. So narrowing the things that Keir Starmer can really go for the Conservatives on. But Keir Starmer very keen to highlight the tax rises coming from that budget, an average of £1,400 for an average household, he said, which of course is a lot of money, especially in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Keir Starmer also, again, attacking the government on non-DOMs and their failure to get rid of that. Of course, Rishi Sunak's wife, cameras going off, are we seeing? Pardon me, heard a load of cameras. The South African president's going to emerge at any moment. So yes, of course, Rishi Sunak's wife had non-dom status, and that was dropped by her earlier in the year. Keir Starmer also going on the energy giants, feeling that the government not being tough on that. But overall, I think Rishi Sunak had a fairly good performance, and I think his team will be happy with that.
There's a big Rolls-Royce with a South African, or it might be a Bentley, actually, with a Rolls... no, it's a Bentley, yes, with the South African flag indicating that perhaps the president is about to leave. But while we wait for that, we were discussing here in the studio the issue of Dominic Raab. We've now got this indication of a senior lawyer, Adam Tolley KC, an expert in commercial and employment law, actually being appointed by Rishi Sunak to look into these allegations. Oh, there's the president behind you.
Yes, and that news has... Aha. So they have been at a lunch following Prime Minister's questions, along with Rishi Sunak, also with the Foreign Secretary and Trade Secretary. Of course, there was the banquet at the Palace yesterday, and then business today, talking about investment, talking about this £5.37 billion joint partnership deal, which both countries hope will bring plenty of business. And of course, South Africa, an important country for us in terms of trade, our largest trade partner in Africa. So this visit, long in the planning, these visits are requested. There's Kemi Badenoch, the Trade Secretary, we can see in the back.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, Catherine, I think that's one of the vehicles from the royal household because, of course, this is a state visit. But we had this indication that Rishi Sunak had prepared this, I think it's £5.37 billion joint project deal for infrastructure and partnership. And, of course, the government really wants to achieve some trade deals elsewhere in the world, doesn't it?
Yes, especially after Brexit, of course. We are looking around the world for opportunities for better trading relationships. And of course, South Africa as a Commonwealth country is a perfect example of that. Now, this is the first state visit there has been since pre-COVID. So it's been over 3 years. There was last a state visit for South Africa was 12 years ago, which is not very long, actually, and does underline how important this country is seen by Britain. So it seems to have gone off very well. I believe he's going to see the King again now, but obviously all the pomp and circumstance were laid on yesterday down at Buckingham Palace. He also addressed MPs and Lords in Parliament yesterday. So a successful outing, and I think the government will be happy with the progress, the look of this.
And Andrew Mitchell, I think, just coming out with Grant Shapps behind you as well, indicating other people at that lunch. But we were just discussing Dominic Raab, and we were wondering what the remit, the terms would be. We're now getting indications it's not just the 2 formal complaints that were going to be looked at originally. There may be others. And the fact that this lawyer, Adam Tolley, has actually been appointed by the Prime Minister and will report directly back to him.
Yes, he will report directly back to the Prime Minister, and then it will ultimately be up to the Prime Minister to decide what to do with the information. Yes, as you say, I understand that it's not just the 2 formal complaints that have been made, and I think there has been another formal complaint made over the last day or so, that his remit will be to look more broadly across all the allegations of rude behaviour, curt behaviour, bullying, difficult, demanding behaviour that have been made while the Deputy Prime Minister was both Justice Secretary, Brexit Secretary and Foreign Secretary, because there have been many civil servants allegedly unhappy. So what Rishi Sunak will ultimately do with the information, we don't know. But given that he said he was going to lead a government of integrity, transparency and accountability, I would think if Dominic Raab was found guilty of bullying, it would be very difficult for her to keep him in post. But I think that's a big if. I don't think we've any way of knowing what will happen, and we may not get an answer anytime soon.
Yeah, although we should add that Mr Raab says he will thoroughly rebut and refute any claims being made. But for the moment, in a busy Downing Street, Catherine, thanks for updating us there with all the activity. Now, Yorkshire Debt Charity is calling on the government to do more to support the most vulnerable in society with the cost of living crisis continuing. Christians Against Poverty has released a new report today, finding that single parents, those with disabilities and those facing terminal illnesses are amongst the groups at most risk of credit needed to cover essential costs to literally stay alive this winter. Our reporter Anna Riley joins us now at their headquarters to discuss the report, with lots of people busy in the background there, hopefully trying to help people out of these situations. Anna.
Good afternoon, Mark. Yes, we are at the Christians Against Poverty headquarters here in Bradford, where people are working tirelessly to help people get out of debt. I'm joined by Jonathan Shaw. He is the Creditor Relationship Manager. Just tell me, Jonathan, about the report that's been released today.
Yeah, so the report's revealed that almost 9 in 10 of our clients will be turning to credit as a way of coping with either a personal or financial crisis. So we've found that so many families here that we're helping at CAP will turn to credit, whether when their income drops or when their relationship breaks down or when there's redundancy. I mean, Penny was a client of ours who, going through a particularly difficult divorce, had to turn to credit to be able to cope with that income shock, and it can very quickly spiral out of control. So the report that we've released today has really kind of gone into the depth of the different types of credit that people use in a crisis, and kind of broken down into different age groups as well, as to whether or not they'll go for a guarantor loan, or whether it'll be pawnbroking, or whether it'll be an overdraft or a credit card, things like that.
And a lot of people are just, having to turn to credit to get through this winter, aren't they? What are you asking the government to do to provide extra support?
Well, definitely, I think, especially over this crisis, we're seeing that people are turning to credit, like you said, to put food on the table. We really want to dispel that myth that people are accessing credit to live a lavish lifestyle that's beyond their means, that actually people are just trying to make sure that they're keeping on top of their household bills. And you can see how that's a really unsustainable sort of trajectory with that. We want to make sure that people are empowered and have enough pounds in their pocket to be able to look after themselves and their household. So off the back of the report, we are making some recommendations. We'd really love to see some sort of review into the adequacy of social security, because we don't want credit to be the sole lifeline that is available to people in a crisis. And we know that there are things out there like the no interest loan schemes and things like that that can help people in a crisis. But at the moment, it's not broad enough or accessible enough for people in a crisis.
And what would you say to people out there that might be struggling with debt right now, that are choosing between heating and eating?
We'd love you to reach out to Debt Advice, reach out to us here at Christians Against Poverty. So you can go on our website at capuk.org. We have a benefits calculator on there, so people can assess whether or not they're getting enough money coming into the household each month, and whether or not there's some money they could access with that. But really, we don't want people to delay. We don't want to see people waiting 1 or 2 years before getting help, please go on the website and have a look at what help's available to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for speaking to us. So yeah, that's the message from Christians Against Poverty here, helping people get out of debt and helping people get through this cost of living crisis.
Anna, and to the team there, thank you very much indeed for updating us on GB News, and hope that they'll be able to help more people as we head towards Christmas. Now, another shock, it seems, on the way in Qatar. Let's just update you that the scoreline in extra time at the moment, Japan 2, Germany 1. Another shock after that Saudi Arabia victory over Argentina. All the latest coming up as the Germans put their hands over their mouth for the official photo before the game in protest at what's happening in Qatar. Time for me to put my hand over my mouth, but I'm back at 12 tomorrow. Patrick's up next. Stay with us.
It's been a wet morning for much of the UK, but things turning brighter this afternoon. Some sunny spells coming through, but a whole host of blustery showers as well, particularly in the west, where they will be accompanied by gusty winds. This low pressure, and in particular this weather front, made for a very soggy start. A zone of rain working its way eastwards, the isobars squeezing together behind it, blowing in plenty of showers. But that rain is now starting to pull away from the east, heading out into the North Sea, lingering perhaps across the northern parts of Scotland. Brighter skies following, but also lots of showers already into Wales and northwest England. More showers feeding into southwest England. A few getting to the Midlands, but I suspect much of eastern England will be dry this afternoon. It should brighten up across Aberdeenshire by the very end of the day. Single figures generally across the north, double digits the high further south, but blustery, so feeling cool with that gusty wind continuing to pile plenty of showers into Wales, southwest England this evening. Some quite heavy ones around as well, but they fade. We'll keep some showers going in western Scotland, but many places will become dry overnight, clear, but enough of a breeze to stop temperatures getting too close to freezing, mostly about 4 to 6 to start Thursday. We'll start with quite a bit of sunshine across these central and eastern parts, but here comes another band of rain. Now this will zip through, but it will be pretty heavy as it crosses Northern Ireland in the morning, then gets into Wales and southwest England, western parts of Scotland before heading into the Midlands around the middle part of the day. An hour or two of pretty intense rain zipping through and a gusty wind. Much of the east will be dry again, temperatures perhaps a little higher tomorrow, double digits, 11 to 12 Celsius. A wet evening across parts of the east as that rain finally shimmies through, and guess what? It's followed by clear spells and more showers, again coming in on a fairly gusty wind as we head into Friday. But actually, not too many showers around on Friday, looking largely dry. There will be another spell of rain crossing the country this weekend and slowly turning a bit milder.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, for my new show on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Friday, 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple.